Welcome. Before we get started, I'll just mention that anybody wanting to speak to the Planning Commission this evening should fill out a speaker slip that's located in the back there before you enter the chamber. So you can just fill that out. There's just a few issues of information that are needed, and you can present those to the Planning Commission clerk, Mr. Trainer. And with that, we'll get started with our Wednesday, July 19th, 2023 meeting of the Planning Commission of the City of Falls Church. Mr. Trainer, would you like to call roll?
Yes. Ms. Friedlander?
Here.
Mr. Krasner?
I'm here.
Mr. Stevens?
Here.
Mr. Puentes?
Here.
Ms. Comont?
Here.
Mr. Hyra?
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. I'll mention the Planning Commission is now at 6 members, as one of our members has stepped down, Corey Weiss. So we're awaiting action by the City Council to come up with an appointment to fill that vacancy. But for the moment, we're 6 members. And so with that, the next issue is our agenda. So I'll ask Planning Commissioners if there are any comments or issues associated with the agenda the way it's listed. Seeing none, I'll ask for a motion to adopt the agenda.
Motion to approve the agenda for July 19th, 2023.
Is there a second?
Second.
Ms. Friedlander on the second. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say no. The ayes have it, so we have our agenda. Next is a speaker series, but we don't have anyone speaking tonight. I do have a couple of thoughts in mind for future speakers, and I will address those separately, Mr. Stoddard, with you. So that brings us to our receipt of petitions, and this is basically requests to address the commission. We will have a public hearing on item 6B a little bit later in the agenda. But for right now, this would involve any issues that are not related to item 6B. And so, Mr. Trainer, do we have anybody who would like to address the commission on items other than 6B?
Yeah, we have Brian O'Connor speaking about the Oak Place site plan.
Okay. Yes, please. I'll just Oak Place. That's great. If it's a site plan, which is item 7, that's fine. If you wanted to address 6B, then you might want to wait till that item comes up. I'll also mention that for any of the speakers, we ask that you state your name and address, and also limit your comments to 3 minutes. Okay, I gather then we don't have any speakers, so we can go ahead and move into the action items. And the first one is our minutes from June 7th. Do any of the commissioners have comments or edits to the minutes of June 7th? Seeing none, would someone like to make a motion to adopt those minutes?
I move we adopt the minutes of June 7th.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed say no. The ayes have it, so we have our minutes adopted. So that brings us to item 6B, which is the Oak Park variance recommendation to the Board of Zoning Appeals. So this item involves a public hearing, so we'll open it to, in a few minutes, to anybody who wants to address this item after we hear the staff report and anything that the developer might want to say. So at this point, Mr. Stoddard, I'll turn it over to you for a staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to introduce the item briefly before I turn it over to our case planner, Mr. Zhang. So this item is this is before you as a public hearing item tonight. It is a variance application in support of the Oak Park application to develop a daycare at the corner of Park and Oak. This item was before you previously as a work session item on April 19th. And this is the variance application, and of course it's related but separate from the site plan application that's the next item on your list. So the item that's before you is really the variance request, and that really, it's an application for an adjustment or a relief from the zoning rules as written. And the requested relief is an adjustment from what today is a 40% limit on the building coverage to allow the building coverage to go up to 55% of the lot. And so the question with variances is when you look at the specific site and the specific rules of the zoning ordinance, is the relief sort of needed to allow for fair use of the lot? So that's the question that's before you, and of course there are standards that have to be evaluated for this. But I'll pause there and turn it over to our case planner, Mr. Zhang. Henry?
Thank you, Mr. Stoddard. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the Planning Commission. My name is Henry Zhang, a principal planner with the Planning Department. line 6, the Planning Commission is requested to hold a public hearing and make recommendation to the BZA on the proposed variance to increase the maximum lot coverage from 40% to 55% in the T1 zone. This variance application is a companion case to the site plan and subdivision application, for the same site that will be in the work session shortly. Line 20, just the project. I think the commission saw this project back in April. It's pretty much the same proposal, but it slightly changed the square footage. Now it's 12,008 square feet of the total gross floor area. And with this application also includes the fenced at grade outdoor play areas at slightly 1,448 square feet for the infants, and then a rooftop playground of slightly over 4,500 square feet for the rest of the children in this facility, and also surface parking of 19 spaces. Line 28, that's basically the site profile. This site is surrounded by the existing hotel in the B1 zone, which was built back in 2013. Basically, it's landlocked by the hotel. Line 37, per section 48-172-6, a variance application requires approval by the BZA after a recommendation by the Planning Commission. Line 74 and also lines to 77, basically the state code variance criteria has been used in the analysis of this review. Line 107 to line 200 basically recorded the staff analysis of 5 criteria specifically needed to be satisfied in order to approve the variances. Specifically, the combination of the state and local building requirements limit the use of the property vertically. They had to spread out horizontally. That's trigger the lot coverage variance. Now line 183, the proposed site plan meets all the other regulations such as setbacks, building height, and streetscape standards. In conclusion, staff recommend Planning Commission approve the proposed motion and recommend approval of the variance to BZA. In terms of timing, BZA will not have a meeting until September. So the next step will be BZA's final approval of the variance in September. This concludes the staff presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll invite the developer to address the commission if they so elect. Is your mic on, Mr. Young? Thank you.
I'll start over. My name is Bob Young. I live at 608 Timber Lane in the city. I'm going to just briefly introduce a couple of things that have happened in the last week or so. Last week, we had an Economic Development Authority meeting. We had an expert come and talk with us about what are the things that we need in the city, what are the things that the community wants, and what are the things that the market wants. And among the top 3 items was daycare. Then we had a meeting today of the council's Economic Development Committee, where basically we had another expert from Federal Realty, who's really an accomplished person, and she basically came up with the same thing. Kind of the top 3 things included daycare centers. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our architect and partner, Jack Wilburn, and he'll go from here.
My name is Jack Wilburn. I'm partner with the Oak Park LLC and a longtime architect in the Falls Church City. We support and understand and agree with the findings of staff that this meets all the criteria for application to the BZA. And just as a synopsis for the statement of justification that you have in the package, if you'll go to that, Jack, there were really kind of a couple of big points. One is we don't think that the coverage is in keeping with like-kind properties around us. The 40% restriction on the T1 doesn't make sense with all the other properties around us that are much higher. Two, the daycare facilities are stringently applied a lot of different codes. They have building codes that restrict them, and there's significant state child care code that restricts where children can be and where they can play. And if you go to the very last piece, Jack, if you don't mind, last sheet. Next one. Perfect. This is just a quick diagram, rotated the wrong way, but that's okay. The top, what he's showing right now, is what a 40% lot coverage building, there you go. What a 40% lot coverage building does to the site. You can see there's almost no green space. It impacts parking, and it conflicts fairly significantly. It also creates, if you scroll down, we can go a full 45 feet. It becomes a fairly large building on the street. What we are proposing is, in effect, a smaller footprint to allow us to have state-regulated, at-grade green space for the smallest children, the toddlers. They have to be direct access to the outside, as well as using some of the building footprint to go over top of the parking such that we're not reducing any other green space. We're using the parking as part of our footprint. So we believe that we are, in fact, meeting the criteria for the BZA, and we're providing a proposed building that is significantly lower than the maximum height and does not impact anybody deleteriously, which a 4-story, 45-foot building might. That's it.
Thank you very much. So we are in a public hearing, so at this point, I will invite any members of the public who would like to address the commission on this issue to step up to the podium. And if you could state your name and address, please.
Brian O'Connor, 305 Timber Lane. And I'm here on somewhat on my own behalf, but I was also asked to look at this proposal by the pastor of St. James and also on behalf of the school. And parents are here from the school also who have been in touch with one another about this and looking at the schedule. So I just want to give you that background. And there was a meeting with Mr. Young and Mr. Wetzel and the principal of the school, Sister Carwile, the outgoing principal, and Sister Catherine, the new principal coming in. And this concerns certain issues about traffic because of timing, because of the school operation. So there was a lot of concern about when the daycare would be operating as opposed to when the school parents would be coming in with lots of cars and children. And that was largely resolved, I thought, based on the timing of the operation of the daycare, which would be a different time in the morning. The evening, I think we would have to see, a concern was expressed about Lightbridge going to be operating this and how these issues might be enforced if they opened at a different time and closed at a different time. There was concern about parking with traffic also, and there were concerns about the pedestrian area. One email I got said, "I'm not confident that our pedestrian concerns are addressed, particularly since the developer proposes very narrow streetscape with limited landscaping and a de minimis setback." So I'm not here to comment on the legal basis for the variance at all, nor am I here to say anything bad about a daycare operation in this city being proposed. I think the flow of the children coming in with their parent and the employees parking there should be looked at with the site plan. But I can say that the school concerns about traffic and their own safety of their students was largely resolved yesterday with the meeting with Mr. Young. I'd be glad to answer any questions that you might have of me about this subject.
Are there any questions that commissioners have for the speaker?
Thank you.
Seeing none,
Having
we'll-
sat where you all sit, I want to thank you all for the service that you and the many hours that you put in.
Well, thank you for your comments, and we also welcome representatives from St. James as well. Thank you for being here this evening. Mr. Trainer, oh, I'm sorry. Is there another speaker? I was just going to say, please approach the podium.
Thank you.
You might want to pull that speaker down a little bit.
I know, unfortunately, I don't think I have the same height as our architect. My name is Tiffany Morris Palazzo. I'm a City of Falls Church resident. I live at 210 Great Falls Street. I am a parent of a rising first and second grader at St. James, and I'm here tonight to speak on behalf of the St. James School and Parish, along with Sister Mary Sue Carwell and Sister Catherine Clemmer. Our comments tonight pertain specifically to the Oak Park Daycare and its impact on parking and traffic density in and around the St. James campus, inclusive of the parish. We did have the opportunity to voice some of these concerns in a meeting with the developer just yesterday, and want to thank Mr. Young and his team for their time and consideration. We do have, however, several lingering concerns. We remain concerned that the request for parking relief does not adequately address the anticipated daily volume 2 times daily of 100 to 150 cars. We are also concerned about the requirements for staff parking of up to 40 staff members. As a parent, I also want to acknowledge that there are longer drop-off and pickup times for parents with young children who are carting carriers, diaper bags, strollers, and all the various accoutrements. We also note that the TDM memo references travel by bike, but recognize that most parents with young children do likely plan to travel to the daycare by car. Number 2, we remain concerned that the daycare will increase traffic volume around the St. James School, and that this will pose a risk to our children that walk and bike. So we want to ensure that the city and city staff is reviewing the proposal, including the site plan, with an eye towards ensuring the safety of our youngest children. We review the requested modifications to the street setback and landscaping requirements should heavily favor pedestrian safety, particularly in light of the city's great street vision for Park Avenue. In closing, we have 3 specific requests. We echo the comments from city staff and request that the developer submit a more detailed TDM memo that outlines the proposed drop-off and pickup times in greater detail, as well as the requirements for all-day staff parking. 2, we ask that the developer submit a streetscape montage that shows the proposed structure, including the parking lot and driveway embedded within the city block, particularly given the request for additional lot coverage. And 2, a sidewalk schematic that shows the size and scale of the pedestrian walkway and adjacent landscaping. 3, we ask that the developer submit a map showing total % lot coverage of buildings adjacent to the parcel, as the proposal references these parcels as justification for more expansive lot coverage. Thank you. We are optimistic about the discussions that we've had, but we ask the city to consider our request for additional information as noted.
Thank you for your comments. Mr. Trainer, are there any other speaker slips?
There are no more registered speakers.
No more registered speakers. Is there anyone else in the audience who wants to address this issue? Seeing none, we'll go ahead and close the public hearing part of this item, and we can now allow the commission members to go ahead and ask questions and make comments that they might want to make, either of staff or of the developer. Is there somebody on the commission who would like to start out with any questions or comments? Mr. Puentes, please.
I have a question, I think, for staff. I read all the materials, but can you clarify the justification element regarding the hardship and just the challenges of the site, and then what the state law requires us to do? I think it's referenced in the staff memo, but what is it? What's the trigger here, and what is the expectation of the commission for the variance?
Sure. So let me speak, I guess, to the role of the commission of this, and I'm sorry I didn't go into this in more detail first. So you all are, in this capacity, you all are advisory to the Board of Zoning Appeals. They have the final say on variance applications in the city. So that'll go, depending on the outcome of tonight's meeting, that could go to the BZA in September. So your role here is to make advice to the BZA, and those state code requirements are laid out in the staff report. They begin on line 12, Mr. Trainer, 112, if you're able to pull that up.
It's 112.
Yeah, line 112
Line 112, sorry.
to all the way 200,
Am I on the wrong?
198.
There we go. So line 112 is the first of these tests. The bolded text here is the language from, I'm sorry. Yeah, there we go. So those are the tests, and then the text that's in the regular sort of type and face is the staff analysis of that. If there are questions about specific criteria, I might actually turn those over to our case planner. If you're looking for more detail on the specific criteria.
I'm wondering if part of the response is that the state has shifted from the hardship test to the unreasonably restrictive.
Correct.
And I wonder if you could address the difference between those two.
Sure. So there was an old, so the older code for variances was established in the state code, and that it was some sort of hardship, and that was a much higher bar. And then several years ago, the state amended the variance requirements to say that it was an unreasonable restriction, or it denied a reasonable use of the property. And for the last several years, people have been trying to figure out exactly what that meant, because obviously a new test, so you gotta figure out what that means. Within the city's history, I know sometimes we've, in recent variance applications, one that comes to mind is the Mary Riley Stiles Library, where that property needed a variance in order to pursue their proposed expansion. They required a variance for front yard setbacks. They may have also required, I'd have to double check, whether they needed a variance for lot coverage as well. But largely what staff was relying on in that case was sort of the proposed operation of the facility, whether there was a community need that was being met. So we relied on that to consider whether that made it a reasonable use of the property. We've looked at the compliance with the city's small area plan. And so staff has landed on the idea that the proposed use is allowed within the zoning ordinance. It's something that's consistent with the plan, so that makes it a reasonable use. And so when you combine that with the state code requirements around sort of access to the play areas, that's where staff's recommendation lands, that it's an unreasonable restriction. That's the rationale on it.
I kind of interject there, just since staff brought that up. But, I mean, the idea that the code was changed is true, but the reasonableness in state code is not, or in law, is not a new concept. The idea of what's reasonable, courts often have to decide what's considered reasonable, and there's a whole body of case law in land use cases and in others about what's reasonable. So while the use is permitted, how about the intensity of the use? You know, the use is permitted in that zone, but is a use at that intensity reasonable? Or maybe a smaller use could be reasonable. Maybe a different use could be considered reasonable use of the property. Just because the use is allowed doesn't mean every lot in the T-zone can have a daycare or should have a daycare or should be able to accommodate a daycare at that scale or that size. And so I saw the 40% graphic shown there, and I guess I'd like staff or the applicant to explain why building by right at the 40% would be unreasonable. Why would that not be a reasonable use? Why would it not be a very viable use of that land? And there may be other reasonable uses. I think there could be many. So why would the staff feel that 40% meeting the code as has been adopted by council and the current code that applies in that district, why is compelling someone to follow the adopted code unreasonable, but allowing an additional bump is needed. Otherwise, it's an unreasonable restriction that's been placed on this landowner because of some specific physical defect with the property. Anyone can answer that. I'm asking
Well-
staff first, and then maybe the applicant can chime in.
Yeah, if I may, Commissioner, I think the situation here is kind of unique. We have a comp plan which calls for the redevelopment and lot consolidation for this property. And also we have a small area plan, even though small area plan is not, basically not having the same weight as comp plan because it didn't go through those required procedures in the city's context. That still call for, same thing, pretty much. And then they specific, if you look at those comp plan map and the small area plan map, they have those two parcels identified. And then I think, as stated in staff report, this land is basically separate from the rest of the land. And they can't, even though they do everything to consolidate those two lots, they're still small lot. That's the basic situation. And then in terms of the variance criteria, I think previously it's very, basically it's like undue hardship and the practical difficulties. And that's basically the standards. But
wouldn't
that
that, sorry
standard,
to interrupt you, but wouldn't that be a self-imposed hardship? The choice to build a daycare here is the applicant's choice. He could choose to do any number of things on this lot at any intensity.
right.
And I understand the argument about financial issues, but variance law doesn't allow
No.
the BZA to include any of that. Economic development arguments, what uses might be liked by people, none of that really matters. We're talking about a physical issue here, a
Yes.
lot and a building, and an ordinance that requires certain restrictions on where that building can be and what it can look like. So I don't understand, I'm not seeing how the by right building options, of which there are probably many, in addition to a daycare, but including a daycare, why building by right is effectively, there hasn't been a claim of hardship that there's no buildable options there. There's a use there today. Some courts might say that, and I'm not an attorney, but some courts might say the pure fact that there's a house or there's a structure that can be used for a number of different things there today would on its face be evidence that there's already a reasonable use of the property right now.
But it's been empty for a number of years.
That, I can't speak to the financial aspects that may have, but there's a use of the property. It could be used for a number of things. Someone could live there, it could be used for a small business, it could be used for any number of things. I can't speak to why it hasn't been used, but it's there, the lot's developed. It's not a vacant lot that needs relief in order to use it at all. Otherwise, sure, that's a classic variance. And so, I have other questions for the applicant, but I will say that when I read through staff's analysis, I really did find that it's glossing over some key elements of variance law and the precedent. While the change in the state code added an aspect of of reasonableness as opposed to a hardship, it's still a high bar. And just because people or staff or anyone for that matter finds parts of the code inconvenient, maybe out of date, maybe in some ways restrictive from what they want to do, the process to deal with that is through a code change, which coincidentally we're going through. One of the state code requirements says that it's not such a typical problem that it could be easily dealt with, so to speak, and I'm paraphrasing, through a change to the ordinance adopted by City Council. If the lot coverage requirements are so onerous, that applies across all the T districts. Perhaps they could be changed. In fact, I think this commission's been looking at that exact question, which would seem to potentially deal with the issue. So to me, that also it seems to undercut that argument in the way I read it. So while I certainly understand people want to build certain things on certain lots, not every lot can accommodate every use at every scale or intensity under the current ordinance. And if we don't like that, a variance is typically not the way to get there. It's through a code change. If we think that the ordinance isn't allowing people to build what the city wants them to be able to build there. But for now, that's the law, that's the ordinance. So If the city wanted some other relief for people to be able to waive or modify through site plan the lot coverage, they could do that, and they could make it easier. But for now, the bar is pretty high. So I don't want to belabor the point, but I don't see it.
Let's go ahead and ask some of our other commissioners if they have any thoughts or comments they'd like to share or questions. First of all, Mr. Puentes, did you finish? We kind of jumped in on after you raised a question, but
Far more articulate than I could have.
okay. Any other commissioners like to comment or ask a question or express a point of view?
I guess maybe I would just comment on the comment about these lots, being orphaned because of the way that the hotel has sort of cut them off from anything else. So I do think that that is a situation that is unique, maybe among some of the other T-zone lots. And it. Oh. It's hard to hear you. You can't hear me? It's on. I was saying that these two lots are cut off, I think, as noted in the staff report, and that is, I think Mr. Krasner was saying that, there are a lot of small lots in T-zones, and that's true, but not all of them are sort of landlocked by the intersection and the hotel. So I personally see that as a unique situation. I don't know that I have any other questions for staff at this time or the applicant.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Friedlander, any comments or questions?
I tend to lean toward Mr. Krasner's assessment of the, in particular to the scale of what we're looking at. I think a daycare is a great use for this location. I know that there's definitely a need in the city for it, so I would love to see something like this move forward. I think that the scale of what is shown in the documents is larger than what is, the number of students that is in the report. The report says that there's a max capacity of 150 students, but when you actually add up all of the students and the potential for adding more students in some of those swing spaces, there's a potential of full capacity of over 200 kids in there. So that also increases the staff requirements for the caregiver ratios as well. And so I think I tend to lean towards what Mr. Krasner is getting at in the overall scale of this. Maybe it is unreasonable. Maybe the scale of it is making it unreasonable, and maybe if it's scaled down, then you could meet the 40%.
Seeing the developer asked to address that question, would you like to do that?
Sure. Commissioner, you're referring to the other swing spaces. State law precludes the use of other spaces for the kids because there's a state law says how many square feet of facility per child. So that the facility can't be expanded internally. You can't just convert
Have fewer
offices.
children. Why couldn't you have fewer children?
I'm answering one question at a time.
I'm sorry.
I'm actually going off of the numbers that are on the architectural plan.
Correct, which has a stack. There is a mathematical, it's 160, not 150, but there's no 200 possible.
If you do have a multi-purpose room
Those
that
are
labels,
non-simultaneous uses. So
but
when
it's
you
outfitted the same as a regular daycare room, so
state
there's
law
nothing that precludes you
precludes the
from
use
using
of
it
those
that way.
spaces for anything other than non-simultaneous use. In other words, state law, which is they have to be relicensed on a regular basis, precludes them from having more students than the square footage of the building will allow. So there is no way for them to get 200. All of those spaces, that is totally controlled by state law. So the 200 is not a possible number. So you can add up the square footage, but those are non-simultaneous uses, and it's enforced by state law regularly and annually. So to the other question about size, there's kind of a sweet spot for a lot of businesses. If you're under a certain size business, you have some core costs that can't be absorbed unless you have the right size facility. We're told by this operator and multiple others that they will not engage on a facility if it's under a certain size.
But isn't that a financial issue that, while very perhaps relevant to the business,
And I
is
agree
not
it
relevant
is,
to
which
variance
is
law?
also not what this board is in charge of deciding. This is a BZA
Exactly. Well,
process,
we're,
correct?
we're making a recommendation to the BZA.
Correct, and it goes to the BZA, I believe, regardless.
They
Your
will have the final
advisory.
word, you're correct. But I'm just saying that that's the financial argument, I think, while very relevant to the business, to the owner, I'm not saying those don't matter in real life as far as the business goes, making it a viable business. But as far as a variance argument goes, the choice to conduct that business at all there is something that the landowners
And we'll be
choosing to
discussing
do.
that with the BZA.
Ultimately, yes, you will. But that's, we're here to talk about it. I mean, I didn't
Can I jump in?
decide to bring this on the agenda. Someone put it on the agenda. So clearly there's a role for the planning commission. I'll let Mr. Stoddard explain what we're.
Yeah, Commissioners, if I
Why it's
could-
before us, is, just like city council this ultimately decides. We're making a recommendation, you're right. But it's incumbent upon us to look at it critically, tell the BZA what we recommend, what we think. They can do with it what they wish.
Sure. So just looking quickly through the property records, it looks like the buildings date back to the at least one of them dates back to the 1930s. So these are certainly older buildings, and we've gotten calls as staff periodically about what are the options for redeveloping these properties. We've heard from the previous owners and their leasing agents that they have a hard time leasing the buildings. They have a hard time making competitive rental rates. And so in some sense, it's economic, but it's economic in the sense that no one can figure out what to do with the property. So they're trying to find the next generation of use. And of course, daycare brings some requirements around sort of ground floor use. Actually, Jack, if we can go back to that 40% exhibit, 60% exhibit. 55%, sorry. So the picture that you see on the left is, I guess, what the code would prescribe, with the building occupying 40% of the lot. T-zones have no impervious coverage limit, so all the required parking for the building would then occupy the back half of the lot. So under the by right scenario, it's nearly entirely impervious, with the building occupying the front half of the lot, the parking the rear. And so when the daycare use is introduced, that creates a requirement for some sort of ground floor open space. And so that's what they're using on the front half of that lot. And so they're taking that square footage from that building and they're repositioning it over what was already going to be impervious surface. So in terms of stormwater impacts from the building coverage, those are right, sort of non-existent. It was impervious to begin with, and it's impervious at the end of it. And so the increase in the building coverage is really a cantilever over the parking area to allow for the ground floor open space. That is a requirement for daycare. And so it is somewhat unique to the site because they aren't able to expand to their neighbors. Those are already recently developed. And it is unique to the use in that it's a specific requirement to use the ground floor for something other than parking or building, which is what our zoning ordinance speaks to. But then the state code comes in and requires ground floor use for outdoor play area as well.
Any other comments from Mr. Hyra?
Just had a couple in terms of, what we have up here, the 40% lot coverage, then the proposed 52. That seems to trigger a different architectural design. And I don't know if we're going to get to this with the site plan, but it'd be nice to hear now because about the architectural design. We just kind of see it, but we don't really see the details yet. And I know when this came before us as a working session, there was a lot of concern about Park Street and the architectural design and how it was sort of closed off to park and wasn't really leading towards more pedestrian-friendly foot traffic and facilitating a walkable street, which we're trying to pursue as a city. So I'm just wondering, with this new lot coverage, if we were to pass it, does it change the architectural design in a way that facilitates a more walkable, friendly building on Park? Because, again, that was, I think, one of the leading concerns, and that wasn't addressed with the part of the proposal that we just heard. So maybe the architect can talk a little bit about how what's up there in a block at 40% versus the block there at 52% differ in terms of what it actually looks like. Do we have that detail that you can show us tonight?
Sure, that's going into item 7 to some extent.
But it's not really, because without the variance,
Absolutely.
you
So
can't.
if you'll scroll down a little bit more, Jack, this is at a very gloss level. This is a cross-section from park to the parking garage. The lower left is if I take the 40% footprint and go straight up at 45 feet, which I can't park, but maybe there's some use. I'm not sure. Nobody has found anything. And what that creates is a very, I think, unattractive streetscape. I think Falls Church actually has that at certain parts along Park, and everybody has uniformly said that that's abhorrent. In this case, what we're doing is we're keeping it at 2 stories at the street, so that, and then it's a sloped roof, just like a house in the neighborhood. We think that we're presenting with this lot coverage something that is more in keeping as a transitional use itself, but also a building that results in a, not this harsh streetscape, very tall, 3 stories or more. This is 2 stories at the street with a sloped roof and all activities to the rear. So it is not very active, but in case that means all the activity is back from the street, so it's quiet.
Okay, thank you. Well, I guess more of a comment for us as planning commissioners is to think about, as Brent sort of mentioned, we have a choice of like approving this to move forward to the BZA, but there's also a process underway already with the T-zones, right? So do we feel more comfortable with what might be approved, which is likely to be approved with the T-zones and its coverage? Or do we feel comfortable enough with what is being proposed that we give this variance to have it go forward before the legislation with the code change, the zoning change on the T-zones? I don't have an answer for that, but I'm saying we have a choice to make. If we don't really feel like what's being proposed right now fits with the ordinance and fits our tastes and preferences, or the tastes and preferences of the small area plans, I mean, there is an opportunity that this site will be redeveloped if the T-zone ordinance passes. It'll just take a little bit longer, right? But not that much longer. We're probably about to see the T-zone legislation pretty soon. It seems like it's moving, it's gaining momentum.
But there is a
steam.
risk there, because you have the application now. The
Oh, of course,
applicant's willing
but
to
I'm
do
just
it.
saying, we have a choice to make, and there are
Right.
risks, and the risk is that we could approve something that doesn't really fit with our vision for this area, so I just pose it. I don't ask the applicant or any of the planning staff to address that point. I just want us to be aware that this is not do or die on this proposal, on this lot. There are things that may happen later on with legislation that likely is to be approved. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, let me weigh in a little bit on this. I'm not willing as much to speculate on whether 150 students versus 100. I think that gets into kind of the financial inside issue of a development process, and I'm not sure that's our lane. To me, the winning argument here is that the state building code puts pressure on the shape of the building, as we've seen. So either it gets taller to meet the 40% limit, or the city approves a variance, which results in a shorter building, but one that exceeds the 40% lot coverage. So it just strikes me that the latter option is a better result for the neighborhood in terms of the general outcome. This is a unique site. It's hard to develop, and I think the risk that we face here is that by not going ahead with a recommendation to approve, that we have 2 aging buildings that will remain empty for who knows how long. I don't see that as a good outcome. So there's risk either way we go. I just wanted to point that out. It strikes me that the thing that we really should be looking at are the comprehensive plan and the small area plans, and I think the feedback we have from staff is that, and I'll quote the words here, "The project generally aligns with the city's comprehensive plan and applicable small area plan." And that strikes me as the lane in which we should be operating. And I believe that we could make a positive recommendation to the BZA based on our assessment of the overarching planning documents. So any other comments from commissioners? I'm getting a sense that there's not a lot of support here, but perhaps unless there's any other comments or questions, we should perhaps go ahead and tee this up to take a vote and see how we come out.
I have a question, though.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Because again, this comes back, we're just talking just about the variance to increase the proposed lot coverage.
Right.
In looking at the other documents, which kind of is part of the work session.
The site plan, yeah.
Right. There's information in there that kind of shows the imperviousness, and you can do the calculations of that, and those will kind of fit within the future, what right now is being proposed
Yeah.
for the T-zones. But in approving a variance or just making a recommendation to say, yeah, we're okay with this, that level of imperviousness could change, though, in between.
My understanding is that how we vote on the recommendation for the variance doesn't tie our hands into what we may ultimately decide to do on the site plan.
Okay.
That the two are kind of separate items. That's not to say in the back of our minds that we're not thinking about, the other aspects, but from a technical standpoint, I think in this item, we're looking just at the lot coverage variance and our recommendation to the BZA. And, we're going to have plenty of opportunity both tonight and at future sessions to get into the details of the site plan, including the impervious coverage.
Can I build off this point? I think, because the motion says we're going to increase it from 40 to 55. So it is that specific. So once we get into the site plan conversation, that could change. Is that where you were? Is that where you're going? Because
But that's the lot coverage. She was talking about the impervious surface.
Yeah,
And-
other
But
issues.
it's multifaceted, right? Because you also have the same idea of height. So right now, we're saying, yeah, we can agree with, a more spread out lot coverage with a lower height, and if we can define it that way so that it's not a greater lot coverage at the by right height all the way up to the 50 feet or the 45, or whatever. I don't have it in front of me, but you know what I'm saying? If we're saying we understand your argument to increase
The lot
lot coverage, that comes with the lowering of the height to be at the 2 stories rather than at the 3 stories or the 4.
That's their proposal, yeah.
Right, but so long as the recommendation to the BZA says that height, we're recommending it with the understanding that height is coming down in order to spread that square footage out, right?
Yeah, I guess that would be inherent in the request, and I presume the BZA will go through.
Unless the BZA puts a specific development condition on it, I mean, technically, we're only talking about
Which
the
they could.
coverage. They could go
Right.
for more than that. But I don't know.
If I
Again, I
could-
just want to remind my colleagues that a variance is a unique, approval in land use law. It's different than a waiver or a modification from a site plan requirement. And it's not meant to be a way to circumvent parts of the code that somebody doesn't like. It's a relief valve that exists in state law so that when an ordinance, as applied to a particular piece of land, is either causing that hardship or it's preventing reasonable use of the property. And if you don't meet any of the tests, the variance standards, you have to meet them all. If you don't meet one, the BZA can't approve it and shouldn't approve it. Doesn't mean, have variants been approved in this Commonwealth that don't meet all the standards? I can't speak to that, but probably. But I am telling you that in this case, I have not seen any evidence that a 40% by right building is not reasonable. There's nothing precluding someone from building that, short of financial reasons, which, while, again, I'm not trying to minimize that for an owner or a developer, but variance law specifically avoids any discussion or analysis of financial hardship, financial impacts. It's a physical calculus. It's based on what is the ordinance doing to this lot, as applied to this lot. Can someone get reasonable use? Maybe not the highest and best use, maybe not their dream use, maybe not maybe not that, but is there a reasonable use of the property? I think there is. So
Okay.
I encourage my colleagues to think about that. There's a process to change the ordinance if we don't like it, if other people don't like it, if the council doesn't like it. And that's the way to go about it, not using a variance because there are aspects of the code that are out of date or we don't like or we think aren't yielding economic development the way we want to see it. Variance is not the tool to do that.
Okay.
I'll shut up.
Got your points. Any other points or comments that commissioners would like to make? Mr. Zhang, any other comments you want to make?
Well, if I may, yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to, not to, belabor so hard, but I think I heard two concerns. One is the variance criteria is not, are not, reasonably applied. But I think the uniqueness is one of the very important criteria. And in this case, we did find that. And then the second is operational issues. I think, remember last work session, the commission asked staff to find out the status of the daycare facility within the city. And then we did, go through a interview, which find out the situation we are dealing with is not, so bad, so to speak, because we find the situation, this proposal compared to the existing facility, they are at a very high level of the spectrum. That means we have a very comparable situation here. Easter Seals Child Development Center is pretty much the same size, same lot, same land size, and the same relief from the parking. But I think they are approved up to 162 students, and they basically used offsite parking as well. So it's in the attachment 2C. It's under the site plan document. That's why I just want to bring it out. We have provide specific discussion on the 5 specific requirements in the variance criteria. We believe this difficulty is not self-inflicted because we don't find any zoning violation was related to this property, and I think economic is an argument, but that's not the criteria for granting the variances. And then I heard the commissioner mention about the change of the zoning code. Actually, the last criteria here is, whether you need to have other process to allow this. No, we don't. And then the criteria keep asking whether this situation is a recurring situation. We don't believe it's a recurring situation. We don't believe we need to change the code for this type of situation. As I mentioned, every property, especially in the T-zone, is very small. And I think the site comp plan and small area plan called for consolidation. And then I think this site is unique. They did all that has been called for by the comp plan and small area plan, and then that's still a small site. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thank you. It strikes me that whether or not we pass a variance is kind of a judgment call. Obviously, that's why we're here. It's not an automatic press a button kind of thing. People have to read the law as best they can, interpret it. We've heard from staff who are, certainly reasonable experts in this area recommending that the variance be approved. Some of our members, to their rightful ability, say perhaps that's not the case. So it's just an area where we have to apply our judgment and make our best case and decide it as best we see it. So I'm thinking what we should do right now is go ahead and put this to a vote, and we kind of move on to the next item on our agenda. Is anybody would like to make a motion to address this item?
I'll make the motion, Mr. Chair.
Commissioner Comont?
Whereas on February 27th, 2023, the applicant filed a site plan with variance, waivers, and subdivision consolidation plat, and whereas Section 48-173A requires that all variance applications be sent to the Planning Commission for its recommendation, and whereas the application was reviewed by the city's technical review staff, and the Planning Commission reviewed the application materials and staff's technical comments and held a required public hearing with proper notice during its July 19th, 2023 meeting. Now therefore I move that the Planning Commission recommend approval of the variance from Section 48-1101 to increase the maximum allowed lot coverage from 40 to 55% to the Board of Zoning Appeals, BZA.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Mr. Puente is on the second. Mr. Trainer, would you like to call the vote?
Can we ask, do we still have questions or
I'm sorry?
discussion?
Yeah, sure.
On the motion?
Go right ahead.
So how, does the motion then tie this, with the site plan? I mean, it's in the, site plan is in the motion, right? Does this then apply to the properties or to the site plan that's accompanying it?
Yeah,
If the site plan doesn't work for some reason.
Yeah, and so I think it's fair to have this as a discussion on the motion. So variances do run with the land, and so this would be sort of a blanket approval to increase the lot coverage to 55%. And a lot of the conversation tonight has been about sort of not only is it sort of the land, but the reasonableness of the use and the ground floor requirements. And the BZA can impose conditions as part of granting a variance. So that may be something that you want to communicate to them, that somehow if you are going to recommend approval of the increase, that it's somehow related to the use of the daycare and the ground floor open space requirements that they carry.
How would we do that? Would that be added to the motion, or?
Yeah, I think you would amend the motion, because this is really your communicate, right? This isn't the variance itself, right? This
No.
is your recommendations
Right.
to the BZA. And so I think if you were to tack on to the end of the motion, allow the lot coverage to go from 45 to 50% in consideration of the proposed use as a daycare and the ground floor open space that's shown with the companion site plan.
All right, well, I don't think we'll get that far, but if we do, then maybe you can help us with the wording
Sure.
on that. Did you have anything else?
It would make me feel more comfortable if there was a tighter connection between the variance and then the proposal we have here.
Yeah, I agree.
So I don't know how to.
Just the applicant, we're happy to encumber your proposal for also the height, because I think that's what Ms. Friedlander was specifically, and it's not our intention to have a property with 55% that can go 50, whatever that maximum height is. That's not the intention. So if that also helps, we're happy to have a variance endorsement that includes, it's based on the site plan height as much as the use.
Yep.
So the open space and the height is what, the open space,
I think it's
And the
based
height,
upon the
yeah.
proposed use and height of the building.
Yeah.
Is that right?
yeah.
If I may, I think we can, the Planning Commission can attach condition to limit the building height to what the proposed, like 37 feet instead of maximum allowed 45 feet. And then at the same time, I also heard it's a compromise. Because of this variance, they will be able to design, shorter building, and then will be, in terms of building style, can be compatible on both frontage, both park and Oak. They are very residential in style, and then because this will, we will see that in the site plan. So, but definitely, the commission can attach a condition regarding the building height, design, and like those kind of things.
Commissioner Friedlander, did you have some language that you would like to see here? Or otherwise, I was going to ask Mr. Stoddard for his help to recommend the addition of maybe another whereas, or?
I'll take your help.
I think you'd want it in the resolve statement. So I think if you were just to tack onto the end, I think you could just replace that period with a comma, and you could say, to accommodate the proposed daycare use with a maximum of, is it 150 pupils, at a maximum building height of, you probably want to allow for final engineering, so a maximum building height of 40 feet, and to accommodate the required ground floor open space as dictated by state code.
Can you add that, Mr. Trainer, or?
Was that
He's like, "Can you
I thought is that still under discussion? I thought that was,
I
wanna
think
try it again?
I'm nodding my head, so I'm
Say
happy
it.
to repeat it. I mean, obviously, I can't make the motion for the commission, but the wording was to accommodate the proposed daycare use with a maximum of, I think is it 150 pupils?
150.
150.
150 children?
Okay. 160 pupils.
Oh. I thought it was 150.
Pupils.
Children?
Yeah, sure. That's fair.
Children.
I call it school with my kids. So, a maximum building height of 2 stories and 37 feet, or I'm sorry, let's say 40 feet to accommodate engineering.
sorry, maximum height of,
2 stories or 40 feet, whichever is less. And the ground floor open space as required by state code.
State code, okay. Commissioner Freelander, does that help you?
It does help me.
It does, okay, very good. I'm certainly comfortable with it. Any other
So
comments?
is that
on-
a friendly amendment I need to accept as the maker of the motion
Sounds to me like it is.
It's a friendly amendment,
from you?
yes.
Okay, I accept it.
Okay, and do you accept it as a second?
Yes.
Okay, all right, I think we're aligned on that. So, not hearing any other comments, Mr. Trainer? Oh, I'm sorry, go ahead, Mr. Hira.
I just wanted to make one comment because I know we're about to vote, and I think it's important to clarify why I'm going to vote in a certain way. As I said, we have a choice. We can either recommend what the applicant is asking for. We can say no to it. We can also think about, we have something that is going to come before us, which we've already discussed, which is the T-zones, which will activate many of these sites in different ways. And also that has affordable housing requirements as it's written right now. This would be wonderful to get daycare, but it would do nothing for our affordable housing. Maybe we could get a T-zone legislation that could allow for this use and get contributions to affordable housing. I'm willing to take a gamble. And the gamble is try to get this and affordable housing. With this, we don't. So I am not going to vote for this. But it may pass anyway, but I want everyone to understand why I'm not voting for it. I'm not voting against a daycare. I am voting in a way that hopefully will allow us to get a daycare, activate this space, activate the T-zones, and also get affordable housing. Too often, we just pass things and pass things and pass things and get no affordable housing contribution. So I'm willing to gamble to hope that in the future we can activate this site with a different piece of legislation and get some affordable housing contribution.
Okay, fair enough.
Last comment, if I can have a discussion on the motion. Because again, I just want to echo what Mr. Hira said, but again, to bring it back to what this boils down to, it doesn't meet the standards. The variance shouldn't be a convenience to the owner. The choice to build a daycare here is completely voluntary. Therefore, it's self-imposed. There have been a lot of cases, a lot of that effect. And so, I mean, ultimately, the BZA will decide, but I think that we need to remember that. Otherwise, we're kind of making a mockery of the ordinance, and it's kind of, whatever we feel like. If we don't like the ordinance, we'll just get variances to ignore it, essentially, which we could choose to do. I don't think it's the best way to operate a municipality. Anyhow, that's it.
Very good. Mr. Trainer?
all right, Ms. Friedlander,
Yes.
Mr. Krasner,
No.
Mr. Puentes,
No.
Ms. Comont,
Yes?
Mr. Hira,
No.
Mr. Stevens.
Yes.
Motion
Does not pass.
does not pass.
Yep.
It's a 3-3 vote, so the motion doesn't pass.
No action.
there's no action. So as a group, you could continue to work on alternate motions if you wanted to, or if you think it's not likely to result in a passing motion, staff would just communicate to the BZA that you all were not able to sort of make a recommendation either way.
I think, from my perspective, that's the appropriate communication to make, unless anybody else feels strongly to make an alternative motion. I think we're at where we're at. Thank you very much. I believe we can move on to the next item, which is item 7, which is our work session on this same issue. But this being a work session, we do not have a vote associated with this. So, Mr. Zhang, are you going to introduce, or I should ask Mr. Stoddard if anything you want to do by way of introduction first?
Sure, I'm happy to introduce the item. Mr. Chair, so the item before you now is the site plan and subdivision applications for the project we were just sort of discussing, which is the Oak Park proposed daycare facility at the corner of Oak and Park. As a site plan, as well as it's called the subdivision, but it's for the consolidation of the 2 existing lots. These items are before you as a work session tonight. They were before you previously. I think when I looked up that date, it was in April. You wouldn't be able to act on these applications until, unless a variance is approved by the BZA. But if the variance were approved by the BZA and this item was before you for action, you all would have the final deciding authority on whether or not to approve the proposed site plan and development. Staff has worked with the applicant on comments raised by staff as well as comments raised by the Planning Commission at your previous work session, and there have been several adjustments to the proposal. I'll allow our case planner to step through those, but then otherwise the item is before you as a work session tonight, and staff has flagged a list of items that we're still looking for changes to the application material should this come back to you for final consideration. But with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Zhang.
Thank you, Mr. Stoddard. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the Planning Commission. My name is Henry Zhang, Principal Planner with the Planning Department. I will start with line 7. Planning Commission is requested to hold a work session on 2 related applications, site plan and the subdivision consolidation for the proposed daycare center. Line 14. Staff has completed review of the second submission, which find the project generally aligns with the city's comp plan and the applicable site small area plan. Staff has identified several technical issues required additional review, which include following. Basically, we still need a pickup and drop-off plan as part of the TDM. We still need to, we still need the information for an off-site parking arrangement. The applicant need to update the planting plan in response to city arborist comments. They still need to relocate the transformer outside of the required front yard setback. They need to provide information regarding the tree canopy of the site, as well as had to confirm their adequate fire safety access. Line 29, the Planning Commission was introduced to this case back in April. In response to the comments received, as well as those received through staff DRC review, the applicant has addressed all those 8 major issues, and a summary of the major changes compared to the first submission is provided below. Basically, regarding the application, they provide all the required material, include justification for all the required reliefs, such as parking reduction, waivers, and the variance. And then they also submitted required information, such as a TDM study for the required parking reduction. The change to the building and site, which the applicant will have a presentation later on to show the detail, include this decrease the parking reduction from previously requested 68% to 50%. And then provide detailed building floor plans and old elevations, including the dimensions and the finished materials. And also provide specific areas information of both outdoor play areas for the infants and the rest of the children. Add more shade trees as suggested, and also provide sign detail and dimensions as requested. Now go to line 160. This land use action required. In addition to the variance application, 3 additional actions will be needed for this application. First, of course, the site plan per section 48-1134A. Second is subdivision per section 38-33. And then third will be 3 waivers. One is the waiver of the commercial entrance within 100-foot distance of the site, of the R district. And then per section 48-11812, the applicant asked for the waiver of the perimeter parking lot landscaping requirement. Now goes to line 344, parking reduction. Line 353, the city code zoning ordinance allowed the applicant to request the reduction of the parking in section 48-969 through 48-972. The applicant proposed TDM study. On top of that, they still have an off-site parking arrangement in order to get a parking reduction. TDM, basically in attachment 1E, they have a TDM study, but as I mentioned earlier, they still need to provide additional pickup and drop-off planes as part of the TDM. Also, in response to the comments during the last work session, we had a telephone interview, which documented that interview in attachment 2C to see the status of the daycare facility in the city. Line 373, under the 48-972B2, they are working on 12 off-site parking spaces, which they need to provide a document to the Planning Commission before the approval of the detailed site plan. Not finally, but line 389, the applicant include a waiver justification, which we didn't have last time. It's in attachment 1D. Line 400, consolidation of the existing lots for redevelopment basically is called for by the small area plan. Line 407, timing. Basically, this application will need to have the AAB and the BZA approval before the Planning Commission can make the final decision. This concludes the staff presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Does the applicant wish to make any comments?
We'll just keep it very brief. I anticipate a number of questions. Mr. Trenner, if you'll go to our set of slides. Thank you. We really want to do right by the city. That's this application. We think a daycare is a fundamentally great use for this transition site, and it brings a much-needed use to the city. We think it's a perfect transitional use from the residential to the higher density buildings on Route 7. Next slide, please. we'll be talking on this ad infinitum, but I will point out that the Park Avenue elevation has the full streetscape per city plan. We've made one modification on Oak where we've actually pushed the sidewalk slightly closer to the street because there's stormwater right there. We can't actually plant trees in that segment of the street. I believe we are recommending putting some plantings between the sidewalk and the street. We'll be working with the arborist to make sure that those are viable and don't intrude into the sidewalk. They are full 6-foot sidewalks. It does give us, and we are planning on planting trees adjacent to the building to get them a little bit further away from the overhead power lines there. So our intent is that this is full streetscape, full pedestrian friendly on both street elevations. Next one, please. We don't need to go through that. The 5 components that staff has identified as additional information required, we're happy to provide. We're working on the pickup drop-off plan now to incorporate the data that we have on the operation as well as adjacent uses, including the church. We've completed the basic of the deal. We will have all the off-site parking agreements in time for final submission. Planting plan update. As I said, we would prefer more plants than fewer, and so we're working with the arborist because he's questioning whether some plants will be viable. We'll work to make sure that that is true. On 800 West Broad, for instance, we used a special expanded slate product, slate? Yeah, like a Volclay in the planters so that they would not be frangipane, they wouldn't be all crushed Virginia clay. So we could get viable plants in areas that are smaller than average. And we'd like to look at doing that with this project as well. We're happy to push the transformer back to the 15-foot setback, and we'll be working with Dominion on any other screening concepts. We'd love to paint it, for instance, make it playful, include as well as screening. And we'll work with getting the staff the tree canopy calculations. If you'll go to the next slide. This is just to emphasize that we have 4-sided quality architecture. Next slide. Showing this is on Oak Street. You can see that we have the full streetscape to the left. We've added structured planters by our breaking up the front elevation. And we've provided screen walls to screen the parking and work to make sure that it's all compliant with fire marshal access, et cetera. Next slide. Street elevation, we went ahead and provided sort of the idea of an entrance, even though we don't have physically a way to get in there, partly because of what's going on inside, but also because the street topography is fairly significant there. We're almost 3 feet down from the building down to grade at that corner. And that's the project. Be happy to field any questions. We don't need those. If you just go back to, thank you.
All right, thank you. As I said, this is a work session item, so we won't be taking any votes on this. I guess we have to assume hypothetically that the BZA approves the variance. At least that's the mindset for justifying a discussion on site plan details. So at this point, I think we can open it up to commissioners to present any questions or make any comments. Anybody like to begin?
I can go first.
Mr. Comont, please do.
I want to say thank you, Mr. Zhang, for the staff report and for taking the time to call the other daycare facilities. I really appreciated that extra information. I wanted to point out a few of the numbers in your report. St. Joseph's Preschool, which is a few blocks away from this location, has 100 kids and 4 parking spaces. Easter Seals, as you mentioned, has a similar number of kids and parking, some of it in the park. Falls Church Preschool, which is across the street from the library, which is a pretty busy area, has about 40 kids and no parking, but no parking issues. Is that all correct? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
All right. And then I just want to share anecdotally myself that my children attended Columbia Baptist, which has, I believe, 350 kids, according to the Virginia database. It's the largest preschool in the city. And we often walked with our kids to school, but we also drove them there. And when we did, there were maybe 10 or so diagonal spaces right in front of the old entrance to the building, which no longer exists. It's now a play area. Really never had a problem finding a spot there at pickup or drop-off times because they are so staggered. So I just want to share that's my own personal experience, and that's the reason that, and these figures from these other preschools that are here in the city and operating well, that's the reason that I, for one, don't have a lot of concern about parking and traffic in this area. I do have some questions about the building. That information about that entrance was helpful. I asked for that last time on Park Avenue. I noticed that the other classrooms do have doors that exit directly to the outside. I think it was reported that that is actually a requirement. So is the reason that there's no door there, actual functional door there, that because of the elevation from the grade to the level?
It's that and security and convenience for the children. As much as possible, they wanted the children in classrooms exiting out into the play area so that they have that sort of direction. The other egress requirements there's only one other classroom that has egress to the street, and it's in the corner closest to grade by where the main entrance is off Oak. All the rest are above grade. And so this way we can have the majority of the toddlers who want to go outside can go directly from their classrooms. There's only one classroom that will actually have to walk through a hallway out.
Okay. I'm sorry. I thought I saw in the plans that there were maybe 3 or 4 entrances from the classrooms, but I might have misread it. You're saying there's only one classroom that has a direct
Jack, if you'll
entrance?
go to the next plan. I believe that's first floor. So upper left, I don't have a laser, but the upper left is a utility room for a sprinkler. We can control the grade there. We can push the sprinkler room down. The next door down is actually a classroom fire egress. And so what those kids will do is that they will walk down that hallway outside. The other 2 classrooms basically have direct out to grade, but they're sort of in the secure area so they can get out to the playground easier and quicker.
Okay, so I guess maybe you're making a distinction between an entrance and a fire egress, and I was sort
Correct.
of interpreting those egresses as also,
No, they're all egress or access to the playground.
Okay. Okay. I won't belabor the door. I would prefer to have a door there, but, I understand that there may be reasons that's not possible. I was wondering about the permeability. In the staff comments, they actually said that we should consider the playground to be impermeable because of the materials that will need to be used. So, that would make pretty much the whole site impermeable. So I was wondering what kinds of materials you're planning to use for the parking lot and whether you could introduce any permeability there.
The only reason the playground right now is being considered impermeable is because we haven't done the soil testing to make sure that we can actually provide permeability into the soil plane. The actual product that's being used is permeable.
Great.
So that's what we're pursuing, is to find out if we can designate that permeable. So the submission is taking the most conservative approach. We're planning on using material that is itself permeable, and we believe that the storm structures running down there that we're going to put in will be low enough that we will have enough soil plane to provide that as permeable, but we haven't done the soil testing yet.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. On the transformer, if you said that you would be able to move it out of the setback.
Correct.
Where would you move it to?
We just have to slide it back. Basically,
Would that be into the parking lot then?
It slides between the parking lot and the stairwell. There's a site plan in your documents, Jack.
But it's, okay, so it's possible and you're able to accomplish that without losing any parking?
Correct. There's a 10-foot gap between the building and the property line in that area, and we propose to slide partially back into it. We haven't finalized with Dominion what size transformer, but this isn't a really big building, so we don't think it'll be the same size transformer, for instance, as the hotel, which is significant, but we based our application thinking it would be that large. And so we're working with Dominion now to make sure that we're right, it will be smaller, and we can slide it back.
That's great. Yeah, it's really, I can't exactly tell how big it is, but not really something you want to have right on the sidewalk.
No,
I
yeah,
think.
nobody, that,
So, and I would encourage you, I like the idea of doing some sort of playful wrap. I had that as a recommendation as well. So if you do that, I mean, obviously it's your own private property, but you could consider coordinating with the Arts and Humanities Council for their recommendations, or
then we could get
or
it on
even
the
your
new
neighbors, the
Yeah.
St. James School.
well, I mean, as a development team, we have a long history of supporting public art in Falls Church, and so we'd be thrilled to do it. Make it a competition, make it fun, make it playful for, with the kids, yes. So we're, right now, all we have to do is slide it back, I think it's 8 feet. I think
So it would
it's
be more or less at the corner of the,
parking garage, yes, at the stair egress, that's right there.
the staired egress.
So the darker square is a footprint of the building
Of the
that comes
stairs.
down with, it has the stairs in it. And so what we're proposing, yeah, he's got the arrow right there. That transformer just has to slide back
Towards
partially.
the spaces.
Correct.
Yeah, great. I was wondering, maybe this is more a question for staff, or maybe just an idea for staff, but, with the amount of activity that we're going to have here with this, potentially with the school and the daycare, maybe there's some opportunity for some more, whimsical placemaking to happen at that intersection of Park and Oak that would signify that this is a location where you can expect to see children. I know there were some concerns about, other elementary age kids walking and biking to school. And I am hopeful that there will be parents in our community who are walking or biking to this new daycare, because it's a lovely experience, having done that myself for many years.
Yeah, it's long been a part of the city's small area plans to emphasize the importance of public art and thinking about sort of streets as places where art can happen. I think we talked about it in the downtown small area plan. I think we talked about it in the West Broad small area plan, and we often show sort of images of painting and diagrams and decals and fun things actually in the intersections themselves. It's a great way to connect people and see infrastructure as more than just sort of a way to get around, but actually a way to enjoy the community, as well as sort of introduce some traffic calming measures in terms of getting people to slow down, pay attention to what's going on. It's just a better way to live your life when you have access to art.
If I may, Mr. Chairman,
Please.
we're probably a development group that's done more public art than most any other in the city. We have several installations of murals and sculptures and things like that. So you can be assured that we will do public art here, and we'll do something that's quite whimsical and fun for everybody.
Thank you,
you.
Mr. Young, and hopefully the city might eventually be able to support that effort with our public space as well, if we can do something at that intersection.
Sure. We'll certainly be looking at that.
I have just two more things. I just want to address the arborist comments. He wrote that he does not support the landscape waivers for perimeter parking. The response from the applicant was the design of the building and surrounding landscape doesn't allow for additional perimeter parking. Therefore, a waiver is requested. An additional street tree, I believe, on Park Avenue was added to help compensate. Is it just the way that the parking works out? There's just no room for trees in the parking lot? Is that the reason why we can't meet that requirement?
It's more a function of, if you look at this site plan, which is right up there, we actually have trash enclosure in the back, and we have planting on either side of that. So we, in effect, have all of that planted area, and we plan to put plants in it. Where it gets into it is across the bottom of the property line, just mathematically, you do the full streetscape, you have the building, you have adequate walkway for the kids, interior to the parking, you have the requirement, Falls Church-sized parking spaces and drive aisles, you end up with 2.5 feet on our property. Again, we have a parking garage right there. As we start to plant, we start to shade and block all of that as well, and it gets a little creepy for people. We're trying to do the best we can. We opened up both corners by the in that area because we felt that that also was more likely to be seen from Park, so that we could plant some trees back there.
Okay.
So we're trying it's a sort of an all or nothing the way the variance is written. So on the side to the right, we're asking for a variance only because of the trash enclosure, but the remaining parts of it are all planted.
Okay, thank you. And then my only other question is about the rooftop playground. I was just wondering how it will be shaded. It looks like there maybe are two shade structures up on top there. I just,
Correct. They're very focused on shade. They
Yeah.
have state requirements for that. And there is the provision for when it's required for them to be able to do pop-up. They have sort of those coolaroo fun shades that they put up. They have it both on the rooftop as well as the toddler.
okay. And then is there any opportunity for some sort of green roof or even like a children's learning kind of
They
thing? Or-
actually have to use impact resistance, so we can't put mulch up there, really practically speaking. So they actually have this, it's a rubber mat that they have to put down because of the activities. They have to make sure it's fall protection, the whole 9 yards. So they have the same thing for the toddlers on the ground floor. They have a certain amount of square footage that they have to provide for green, for play area. So it really pretty much locks us, especially because we used a slope roof on the section facing Park. It sort of pinched everything to the back of the lot so that we could maintain that height restriction of 2 stories with a sloped roof. So that ate up a lot of our roof area.
Okay. Thank you. And then just the last thing, I did have one more thing. I just wanted to second the comments from, I think, Lonnie Marchetti with DPW to consider composting for the business. Thing to teach kids young, I think, and it's good for our city. That's it for me.
Okay, thank you. I was crossing off my list as you went through items there, so when I get to mine, it'll be a little shorter. Any other commissioners want to make comments, suggestions, or Commissioner Friedlander?
I'd like to kind of echo some of your concerns about the rooftop. I do like what you've done to kind of shield those mechanical units from view, and also from the pedestrian experience. But also, I do like the solution of having that playground up on the roof. My concern kind of stems from, I don't know what your required square footages are for play area, but if your documents are saying 181 kids, and then there's an extra room there that has another 20 kid capacity, so we're well in excess of the 150 or the 160 that was put into the friendly amendment. So the square footage of the building is big. You have a little extra square footage to kind of play with, since you wouldn't be able to put students or children in those rooms anyway. So that would, by nature, decrease the required amount of square footage for play area. So because the site has such a large lot coverage and the imperviousness of the site, we're trying to mitigate a heat island effect. I'd really like to see, some strong consideration towards an intensive green roof portion of that play area, so that you can mitigate some of those effects. And I think I think it's a good challenge. I think you can definitely, those two things can coexist up in that same space. I think if you're creative about your square footage for classroom space and play area.
One thing we've done before in other jurisdictions is, and DC, for instance, actually counts vertical green as part of that sort of flora, fauna, and green heat island effect. So that's something, we may have some vertical surfaces that we can do for that, put planters and get some vertical planting. And it might be something we look at for that 2.5 foot strip, along 2.5 feet, we could put in a green screen, much as you can see on 800 West Broad. We have a very healthy green screen on that building. So it's something we would look into, yes.
What other sustainable sustainability aspects are you looking at for this development, considering the impermeability of the lot, the size of the lot coverage and all of that? What other things are you guys
Are
considering?
we are a net decrease of impervious area, correct? Of runoff, yes. We have controlled runoff below
I saw
current
that with the
standard right now.
retention, yeah.
So we're doing oversized detention, we're doing everything, and we're rerouting the structure, a lot of that water back into the storm structure and not having it just run into the parking garage and onto it. So that's where we've put a lot of our time and energy for the low-impact development strategies, which I would distinguish as different than, let's say, LED bulbs and that sort of thing. So from a stormwater management and a permeability and trying to deal with that, we're looking to increase the amount of permeable area to do the soil structure, as well as rerouting all that water to the street rather than to our neighbor.
Right. I did notice that effort, so I appreciated that. Can I talk a little bit about the architectural? I know this is site plan, but I wanted to comment a little bit on the elevations. I did appreciate the way that you were working with the proportions of what is on Park Avenue. I'm assuming it's still under development, in that you're still working. I think the proportions are starting to work on that elevation. I think once you start moving around the building, the proportions of that PVC trim and the lack of windows and openings to the expanse of siding, I think those products aren't, when you see large expanses of siding, they tend to kind of
We look forward to the
can.
AAB. We look forward to the Architectural Review Board to give us a little bit more tweaking. We have to work with the operator's prototype architect. So we actually have tweaked this a couple of times, and we're looking forward to using the city's guidance as a tool to explain to the operator's architect that we're going to change it like this. So yes, we're definitely looking to break up some of those areas.
I think it definitely needs a lot more windows, larger proportions of glass to siding, and the PVC trim, especially if you're looking at Oak Street elevation and then the elevation along the south. There's like relatively
Yeah, I tried to explain
zero
that
windows.
we're not New England. We're, Tidewater, Virginia. We're something not New Englandy. So
Well, and I think it'll help in breaking up that brick wall along the sidewalk there. In addition to the materials of the siding, large expanses of siding like that tend to not look very good over time.
we'll, we look forward to using the Architectural Review Board as our whip.
Yeah, and I'd like to see those proportions at that porte cochere kind of awning, that white. Is that going to be white PVC? Is that what we're looking at, or is it gray?
They wanted the contrast of having the entry piece awning to match the roof, so they have a limited palette. And then they started using the white, and they just said, well, we don't want to use the dark across there. So, yeah, it's one architect commenting on another architect's work. It's lots of fun.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it definitely is. I can see it's going to be under development for a while.
Yeah. We're close. I think the massing is what's important, that we've created the roof plane up against the street, it's screened. So I think the bone structure is good. What we have to do is make sure that the textures and the proportions are better.
Yeah, definitely. I think you need to work on the proportions of those and break up those expansive spaces. What would be helpful too is it's really hard to see from the 2D elevations, especially on the backside from where the additional parking is from the parking,
Structure?
Yeah, from the parking structure, is how that will be perceived, because you're only seeing like a thin piece of the roof, right? And then it drops down because it's a play area on the inside. It'd be important to kind of see a three-dimensional view of what that is going to look like.
We
And I see that
can definitely expand the context so that you can see the proportions of what next to it for sure.
Yeah, I think I think you definitely need to see it three-dimensionally. It's really hard to understand what that corner is going to look like, right? Because you're going to see this weird thinness of the roof line. And then the other thing that would be important to show as well is I see that you took the stair tower out of the south elevation here so that you could presumably show the parking garage going in. But again, I think it's important to see what that corner is going to look like with the stair tower that anchors that back corner.
Okay.
Right, because right now it just looks like you took a section cut, but it's not a section cut to go through underneath for the parking. Let's see. I had some other. And then I had a question about the fencing. You had several kind of renditions. One was a picture of a product in place that's like a PVC product. The elevations along Park Avenue kind of show posts that they look to be about 6 feet apart, but then the plan looks like they're about 3 feet apart. So it's really hard to tell what that's going to look like.
All right,
So-
we'll confirm whether it's the manufacturer's cut sheet shows it tighter.
Yeah.
We'll make sure which one they are proposing.
And then I'm glad you're showing this elevation, actually, because as you're walking up Park along toward Oak Street,
Yep,
that fence is 6 feet to the top of the post on the inside from the floor level or from the play area level, correct? So that's
yes.
like a 9 or a 10-foot high?
correct.
Okay. It seems really high.
So one of the things that we'll do is we'll also update this with the landscape plan to show the proportions of the plantings proposed.
That'd be helpful because I did notice that the landscaping plan shows the caliper trees are very young that are proposed to be planted. And I'm glad to hear that you're working with the arborist on that to make sure that you're putting in plants that will survive in those locations. So, and that's all I have for now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else want to jump in?
Yeah, I'll jump in.
Go ahead.
Going on in order. Yeah, Ms. Freelander actually just took a lot of my architectural comments, which I'm happy to have her do, given her background. But I mean, I agree. I think the facade just presents very walled off. I mean, honestly, I mean, I think this, if it was built exactly how this is shown, I mean, honestly, I think it would be a terrible building on Park Avenue. I mean, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's just so walled off and strange, especially that Oak Street elevation with the cantilever. So I'm hoping the BZA doesn't approve it, obviously. But, despite what our chairman just said, I'm assuming they won't do it, but maybe I'm too naive. But regardless, I think that I'm glad to hear you say that you're working with their architect to improve their stock product. I understand this is a franchised operator and they have certain things they like to see and use. Although when I was looking at their website, I mean, they tend to have more suburban style, kind of single story structures. Maybe they have other examples. I didn't do an exhaustive search of all their facilities, but kind of their prototypical one was kind of more like what you'd see in like KinderCare and things of that ilk. That's just one random example. But anyway, so I'm glad to hear you say you're going to look at that about trying to open it up. I mean, it's a real shame that there can't be an entrance on Park. I think it goes against our vision of Park Avenue. It really does present as a walled off, kind of fortress-like. And I get security, it's an unfortunate reality with children these days. So I get that too. I'm a parent, I get it. But it is unfortunate because the way it presents, I think, is pretty cold and closed off. So anyhow, that's the architecture. There are better people on this commission to speak to that. But the parking geometrics, I want to speak to that. We have a bad legacy in this city of some terrible parking garages and parking lots. When I joined the commission, one thing I said to myself was, anytime I see a parking lot come in, I'm going to make sure that it actually works in reality, given the size of vehicles people drive, especially parents dropping off at daycare, who tend to have larger than the average vehicle. I would gather. If we ask this operator with the average size of the vehicles in their parking lot during pickup and drop off, we're probably talking minivans, SUVs. And the way it's there now, I mean, I know you've tried to get the columns out of the way, unlike some of the other buildings we have in town that were approved in years past. But I feel like there's a couple spots in there, I just don't see how it's going to work. And I know that there were some comments from the city, some from staff about that. So I was hoping you could maybe address that, because it's one thing to ask for a reduction, but it's another thing to then have the spots you do provide be practically, difficult or to get in and out of. People learn real quick when it's hard to get in and out of it, and they'll just won't use it. So you could have, on paper, yeah, we have this number of spaces, but if they're poorly designed and hard to use, people just won't use them, and they'll clog up the street parking around there, and they may or may not conflict with the Catholic school, but, also I'm thinking of the neighbors who live immediately adjacent, on Oak and on Park. So I guess maybe you could speak to that. There are a couple spaces at the end that there appears to be no room to actually do a turnaround. You'd have to kind of back out. So, and I know the city staff commented on that. So could you or someone on the applicant team maybe speak to the design of the parking area, and how you think that might work? Like, I'm thinking especially of those two spaces. Look at those spaces on the east side. Picture a Yukon in there or a Odyssey trying to get out of that spot next to the trash enclosure. How are they going to do that? And maybe like we ultimately need some type of auto turn or something that shows for those size vehicles, how people might navigate. So anyhow, I just want to make sure that any
Well,
parking
you're-
lot that we approve here.
We have a turnout behind those two spaces. I see the two you're talking about.
Yeah.
Those two have the ability to turn towards the trash and come out. Is it perfect? No, but it's within
Well,
tolerances.
Is it, have you done an auto turn with vehicles of that size? I'm not talking about, Honda Civics. I'm talking about longer vehicles
We'll certainly work with staff and see what
Because
we
if they're
can
not feasible-
accomplish.
yeah.
I mean, part of this was if we have the constraint from the city has now adopted a 9-foot wide space instead of 8'6", which is really kind of industry standard. And those 1, 2, 3, 4 spaces would pick me up another couple of feet if I were able to shrink them to 8'6". The ones that are outside the column grid and outside from underneath the building. So there are some mechanisms to do that, but the city wants 9-foot spaces for a
We
lot
do
of
for
reasons
a
talked
good
about.
reason. Given the average size of vehicles in this city, for better or for worse. I'm okay with some level of reduction. This commission in general has supported that, but I think we have to be realistic about the type of use. I think I forgot who mentioned it earlier, that a daycare use, some people can walk. I'm sure some small percentage of people who use this, if it's built, will walk, but most will drive. And they're looking to get in and out. Parents are busy in the morning and afternoon looking to, get to work or get home, and they'll take the path of least resistance if the parking lot isn't designed well. So you could say on paper we have these number of spaces, but I just want to be very sure, and staff raised it too, so I'm not just pulling it out of thin air. So let's just do what we can to show that those will work, and if they can't, well, then we need to look at, some other ideas. Again, it gets back to the idea about the intensity, the number of students, which then generates, the number of spaces required. So just something to keep in mind, because I think that it's a lot packed in, and it's not the best designed parking area. I know you're working with constraints on a small site and other issues, but, I think it's a valid concern. Staff raised it, and I think it's something that needs to be worked on to make it more usable.
Okay?
Can I follow up on one thing on parking spaces? Because I meant to mention this earlier. Mr. Zhang also researched the requirements that our neighbors have for parking spaces for daycares specifically. Fairfax County, under their requirements, which are 0.16 spaces per child, ours are based on the square footage. Under their requirements, this facility would need 24 spaces. And Arlington County requires 1 parking space for every 10 children, which works out to 15 parking spaces for a 150-student daycare. I just want to share that additional information because I think it's relevant here.
Okay, Mr. Puentes?
Thank you. As always, the commissioners also addressed some of my comments too, so I'll take some of those off the list too. I also appreciated the telephone interviews with the other daycare centers. That was really helpful for me. Just skipping to the one thing, we did express, as Mr. Hyra said, we did express concern last time about how this activates the street and what it does to this neighborhood. I don't see a lot of improvements there. The faux door, I don't understand the point. I don't know. I think that's supposed to respond to how it activates the street. I don't see how it does it. So I'd really like to see some other detail, some other attention to that, because I agree with Mr. Krasner too. It doesn't seem to be the best, most appealing place to be walking around on that street. I appreciate the comments on parking. I actually don't, as we know, I don't want to see a lot more parking. I think if we make it easy for people to drive and park, they're going to do that. I don't want it to be a traffic, problem here, but I don't want to see more parking than we need. I think there is potential for people to walk here, to walk to with their kids, but it's a hostile intersection now. It's not a very pedestrian-friendly area, partly because of the elementary school and the drop-off next door. I know this isn't about St. James, but I think it's a good example of what not to do, and I think we're going to replicate that here. It's a lot of cars that move in and out every morning, and doesn't make it very friendly for people walking around. So I don't know how we can do it, but I'd love to see some kind of way to address the neighborhood in a more comprehensive way. I think as Ms. Comont was getting to. Some other thoughts to that intersection, something else that's beyond just, just worrying about people getting in and out of the parking garage. I do want to see a more robust TDM plan. Right now, it's kind of anemic, doesn't really address any of the things that, that we've talked about here. So I know there's some things coming up with the TDM plan about the drop-off and everything else, but if that could be bigger, if that could focus more on the neighborhood impacts of this, particularly with the big elementary school next door, I'd really appreciate that. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Hyra, is there anything else you wanted to contribute?
Just a couple things. First, I just want to say, I love the breadth and depth of different perspectives that all the commissioners bring. It's kind of ridiculous. In terms of expertise on a range of issues and also different areas of interest. And I love hearing all the different critiques that you all have of everything that comes before our commission. Also, just thinking about the size of these lots and what's being proposed, we're being as thorough with this as we were, I think, on West Falls Church and Founders Row 1 and 2, and it's kind of amazing how much details not only the commissioners but the staff too put into these different proposals. But I will just underscore one thing, and maybe my memory is not as good as I'm getting older, but I thought that we had a bunch of concerns, but the biggest concern was the activation of park. And the development team is here, and we can go to the videotape, right, and play it back. So our biggest concern has not been addressed. And that's a disappointment. I know you have worked really hard to modify this project, to improve the project on multiple fronts, and I think we all deeply appreciate that. But to see that the major concern hasn't been addressed at all is that's kind of mind-blowing to me. So I really ask, if you want to move forward with this, is there a way to really think about how to activate park? There's got to be some strategies. If you can't do much with the building and the entrance and exits, there's got to be something else that you can do that will activate that area. That think not about the development, think about the community that is adjacent to the development, and what can you do to stimulate activity. Now, we said this last time, and we're going to say it again, but I hope the next time this comes before us, if it does, whether it's with this variance being approved or maybe this variance not being approved and the T-zones being approved, and you go back to the drawing board with the new zoning that you have to deal with, that you actually listen to what we are saying. This is part of our small area plan. This is part of what has been discussed along Park for years. And to know that a development is coming forth on the place that we want to activate and is deactivating it, or is putting up walls, literally walls, that's not going to work. And that's a bad precedent for us to set as planning commissioners for every other development, T-zone or not, that comes before us along Park. So we do care about this site. We want you all to be successful, but we also want you to listen to us, because it's not just about this site. It is about this community, this city, and this really important street. So please think about that when you do your revisions and when you propose something back. You can see there was a lot of resistance on the Planning Commission to this. We often go 7-0. A 3-3 is unusual for us. So that should be signaling something to you, that you should try to do something slightly different. Like maybe actually, almost every single one of us has said the facade along Park isn't working. So think about it. We want something to happen here. We don't want it to be exactly how it is now, but most of us don't want this as it is now, this plan, this project, this building. So please listen to us and work with us, and then you will get a 7-0 vote. Thank you.
I'm writing furious notes.
All right, I've got just a few comments, and then we'll try to wrap this up. I would agree with the need to make a better effort to try to activate the Park Street side of this project for all the reasons that have been stated. I won't repeat them. I'll recognize that the staff list of open items, I think, is an important item, and I would want to see them resolved before we take a vote on the site plan. Just wondering, I'd also like to see that we have a positive response from the Fairfax Water and also the Department of Public Works for water and sewer capacity. I'm not sure that I saw that in the current materials. For TDM, I'd ask the developer to think about possibility of a subsidy for employees to use Metro. Regarding brick sidewalks, it's my understanding that the city's streetscape standard does not require brick. And that being the case, it would seem to be the developer's proposal to put in brick sidewalks. I would ask that you think that through. It's expensive, the maintenance is high, and I think the city has kind of demonstrated some interest in rethinking all the places where brick sidewalks may not need to go. Composting, I think there was a comment on that. I would echo that. We have a good curbside service in the city, and this would be a good location for that. I'd like to see some of the parking spaces incorporate charging capacity for electric vehicles. We have Mr. Young, who's going to be speaking here in a few minutes, and he can be a source of information on companies that will provide level 2 chargers at their expense, or mostly their expense, since they'll be charging for the use of it. So I'd ask to consider that. I would ask that the utilities be all electric. There's not a lot that we can do on this project that addresses climate, but at least having all the utilities be electric is one thing that can be done. And I think that's all I had. So we appreciate the development team showing up this evening and all the work that you put into this project. And also, Mr. Zhang, we thank you for your efforts on the staff as well. And I think with that, we'll go ahead and close out on this item and move on to the next item, which is the Community Energy Action Plan. We'll invite Mr. Young to address the commission.
If I could, Mr. Chair, we've been going for 2 hours. I might suggest maybe
You
a
wanna take a
10-minute
break?
to let people stretch legs.
I see movement in that direction, so yes, let's take a break for 5 minutes.
Yeah.
All right, do we want to try to get everybody, oh, we're missing one. Oh, there.
Not talking about daycare yes, I did bring these.
Okay, I think we are ready to go back into session. I would like to welcome Mr. Young, who will be addressing us on the Community Energy Action Plan.
Different Mr. Young.
A different Mr. Young. Yes, that's right.
Good evening, Commissioners. Appreciate the opportunity to come talk to you all this evening. Jack, if it's okay, we'll just do the presentation. So I'm here to provide you all with an update on the Community Energy Action Plan. So the city in 2017 adopted a series of goals developed by the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in an effort to combat climate change. The city council has asked staff to develop 2 energy action plans to help kind of map out what things we need to do here in the city to help achieve those goals. So can you go to the next slide for me? So the first plan, the Government Operations Energy Action Plan, was adopted by City Council on Monday. So that's good news, one step's done. When you think of the Government Operations Plan, that's energy use in our city buildings, our school buses, police vehicles, and the like. But tonight, I wanted to talk specifically about the Community Energy Action Plan. And that plan's focused on what things can our city government to do to help residents and businesses reduce their energy use and emissions here in the city. So, okay, go ahead to the next one for me. So, I think this one's pretty simple for you guys. Like, emissions come from primarily, 2 places, right? So, it's transportation, how we all get around, and the energy use in the buildings that we have. So, either through natural gas or electricity. Next slide. So COG's been tracking our greenhouse gas data since 2005. The most recent data was collected in 2018 and 2020. So in 2018, despite the kind of changes we've all seen here in the city, since 2005, we showed a modest decrease in our emissions. Saw a more dramatic change in 2020, where I think the emissions were 22% below the 2005 levels. 2020 was a weird year, right? So there's some things that were happening in 2020 that I think have bounced back a little bit for us. And then there's some things that I think have probably stuck around. With help from our consultants, we've looked at, continuing business as usual with maintaining the way things are here today. We expect emissions to rise 15% by 2030, primarily driven by an increase in population that we expect to see in the city. Okay, next. So what do we need to do to combat that change, right? It's a pretty dramatic series of emission reductions that we need to achieve between now and 2030 to meet that 50% reduction goal. So we try to kind of break it out into chunks of what might be possible. And so, I'll walk through a couple of these, and we're continuing to work on these kind of, these slides are from last week, so the data we continue to frame this out in more detail. But in the areas of transportation, there's 2 main things we can do. You can cut down on the amount of driving around you do, and reduce the vehicle miles traveled by folks here in the city. And the second is you change your fuel use for driving around. Essentially, it's electric vehicles, right? So we said, okay, what's possible between now and 2030, in those 2 areas? And talking to our consultant team, we said, okay, the most aggressive, predictions out there for electric vehicle adoption is around 50% of new vehicles sold by the year 2030 will be electric vehicles. So if that happened here in the city of Falls Church, that emissions reduction that we've got on there is what's possible. And similar thought process for vehicle miles traveled, a really ambitious reduction in vehicle miles traveled of 20%, would result in the reduction that you see there for VMT reduction. So a lot of effort, a lot of change, that's the impact you get. The third blue bucket is from the impact from the Virginia Clean Economy Act. So this is the legislation that's transitioning our electric grid to cleaner fuel sources, less coal, more renewables. We've already seen some benefits of that, with our energy use here in the city. It's really important that that continues, and so that's what's highlighted in the blue block. And then the gray block is the part we've still been working on related to buildings. So specifically, building energy efficiency and electrification, and then also adoption and kind of deployment of renewable energy. So in the case here in the city, it's rooftop solar, right? And so as our planning continues, we're framing those out to kind of get our heads around like what's possible and how all this stuff stacks up to be able to meet our 50% reduction goal. Next slide. So I've been kind of doing a road show here for the last month, talking to different boards and commissions and sharing with them kind of a list of potential ways we could impact the emission sources I was just talking about, right? And some of this is, okay, what kind of emission reduction is possible, and then what are things that are specific here to the City of Falls Church that we can make a difference and that work well for our city and our dynamic and all of our challenges to go into the plan, right? And so I won't read through all of these. I'm happy to talk about them in more detail as anybody's interested. But again, in transportation, the two games to play are reducing vehicle miles traveled. So that's how do you get folks to get around the city and get around in their daily lives other ways? Transportation mode shift, people using, public transportation. We've talked about, we resurrect the idea of a shuttle here in the city to get folks not only to the metro, which I think was the plan from the George a number of years ago, but the city's a different place. You've got, different nodes in the city that you could potentially get people between through some other mode of transportation. Of course, sidewalks and bike lanes have been talked about a bunch. We've also talked about scooters and golf carts has come up. Like, instead of a second car, maybe folks have a golf cart in their home to get around within the city. So that's kind of the thought process on reducing vehicle miles traveled. And then on the area of electric vehicles, it's what things can we do here in the city to increase electric vehicle adoption? And so a lot of it's education, and connecting folks with the federal incentives that are out there to make electric vehicles more affordable. There's also some opportunity for the city to potentially partner with businesses here in the city to deploy electric vehicle infrastructure. So they're competitive grants, but there's grants out there for both high-speed charging, which we're eligible for because we're within a mile of I-66, and community-level charging, so charging on street parking spaces, parks, potentially business parking lots and things like that. So I'll pause. Does anybody have any questions or comments on kind of where I've gone so far?
I have some comments, but do you still have some more?
You want me just going to go
Yeah, why
through
don't you go ahead
everything and we'll
talk-
come back? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, next slide, thanks. So similar, kind of thought process on the area of buildings and thinking specifically about commercial buildings and residential buildings because the opportunities and the dynamics at play in each of those two areas are a little different. But, what are things the city can potentially do to help people, in the case of businesses, figure out what they can do with their buildings? I think, talking to some business owners in the city, they're like, I know there's probably opportunities to do something. I'm not even sure where to start. And so is there a role for the city to play to help with that, either through an energy audit program? Again, I've been working through the tax incentives that the city is now eligible for some of our upcoming work, and it's kind of complicated, right? And so do we invest some time and energy to help make that easier for people to understand and take advantage of? I think, we'll get into the special exception stuff on the next slide, but do we look at a green business recognition program to help advertise for businesses and promote some of the good things they're doing from a sustainability perspective? Do we look at financial support? Some of this I think is tough for a jurisdiction of our size, but we can potentially partner with things that Fairfax County or Arlington County are doing to help our businesses. And then some of the similar things on the residential side. So lots of tax credits and rebates are out there. How do we connect? There's a lot of really good programs to potentially help lower income folks. How do we make that happen, right? The city's small enough, we ought to be able to have a list, right, of all the buildings and potential residents that we could help, and how do we make that happen? So, next slide. And then a couple things on the planning process, just as I've kind of been talking to different folks on staff and the different community groups that we've been going around. The special exception criteria, particularly on our couple most recent projects, we've made a lot of progress from where we were 5 or 10 years ago. The LEED Gold is the standard. Some base level of electric, charging, vehicle charging is in place. Green roofs or solar-ready roofs, all of these things the developers are now coming for without us, having to go back and forth on it much. Do we need to look at upping our expectations on those things again, right? If you see the LEED scorecards on some of the more recent projects, to get gold, you don't have to do a lot in the energy part of the LEED certification. Maybe we need to start asking for platinum. There's trade-offs for that, but maybe it's something we should think about. And then I think, you all deal with the zoning questions a lot, but, parking requirements, denser development. One of the things that staff brought up is, there's a lot of challenges with doing renovations of existing homes due to limitations that the code has. So do we look at softening some of those to encourage people to renovate their homes rather than tear them down and build a giant home in its place? So is that it? Okay, so as I mentioned before, we've been working on this, having conversations since March. We had a town hall up at Meridian High School in April where we collected some initial input from the community. You can see the different commissions I've had a chance to go speak with over the last month. We have a virtual town hall next Tuesday. Tell all your friends. It's from 7 to 9. I think we've got a good kind of interactive session. We're going to collect input from the community on a lot of the different topics I mentioned this evening. So with that, I'll happy to talk about anything in more detail or answer any questions you all have.
All right, well, thank you very much for the presentation. It's good to have an opportunity early, because I think you're still pretty early in the process of developing this plan, for us to provide some input. So this is an issue that's near and dear to my heart. So I'm going to go ahead and exercise my prerogative to provide a couple of suggestions and then open it up to my colleagues here. So I'll just give you a few things that I'd kind of like to see in the plan as it develops. First of all, I think you've got in your presentation somewhere the importance of energy audits, especially to the business side. So I'd like to see the possibility of including some grants to subsidize the cost of an energy audit, kind of based on the VPAS program, the Rain Smart program, where they provide grants for rain barrels and rain gardens, and I think they've had pretty good success just by providing that financial incentive. We had I thought, an excellent event on Saturday with the Falls Church City Climate Network to just demonstrate at somebody's home what it's like to have solar panels or an electric vehicle or an electric lawnmower. We had a lot of people show up with very little advertising, and people were very excited to have the chance to actually see these devices and to ask questions from the people that have installed them. So I think partnering with that group to do another demonstration project in the fall would be a good idea. I see Fairfax County has just updated their CPACE program, and it's been a program that's been very difficult to get off the ground in Virginia. So it may be that Fairfax County has gained some insights that we could be the beneficiary of. So I would suggest looking into that. I would like to see an emphasis in the plan on all electric appliances in homes. That's one thing we can do to help slide down that curve on the building side. As the grid gets more renewable energy and lower emissions, if you have all-electric equipment, then you get the benefit of that. If you're tied into gas, then, of course, it'll stay high on the emission side. So those are some things I'd like to see, but on the whole, I'm just very pleased that that you're doing this, and the city has kind of enabled you to go forward and develop this plan, and I look forward to seeing the milestones accomplished as we move forward. Any other commissioners want to provide some input?
I know other people have,
Go right ahead.
just as I know a lot of other folks on the commission probably, again, are more knowledgeable and probably have many more substantive comments, but just like, one thing I thought about, again, we as a commission, I think we do a pretty good job on the big projects, because that's what we see typically. And we're requiring high lead standards and other green technologies, but I think, what so much of what happens in the city and what's fairly energy intensive is like the by right, single family development, and things like what Tim just mentioned about encouraging more electric appliances and utilities, or electric appliances, everything from cooking appliances to heat pumps versus furnaces. I wonder if there's any way to partner with our the people who only people who get to review that stuff are our building reviewers, the people that review the building and construction plans and the infill grading plans. And luckily, being a small jurisdiction, those people typically are sitting, everyone's sitting near each other. And, the idea about partnering with them to try to, I don't know what we could do to try to encourage folks, because that's where the decision gets made about when the builder's coming in and, and he's deciding what utilities to put in the house. That's the time to try to make the sale, quote unquote, to try to, if they were going to go with gas, to go with electric. And I don't know if there's, ways that we could help to kind of market whatever state programs are out there, or other incentives, or just purely, again, bring up those options. And obviously with developers, it comes down a lot of times to the bottom line and ways to incentivize that. But to me, that's like an opportunity, like that. And for, as Tim said, for some of these houses, I mean, it's the only chance you get, and the only bite at the apple, maybe for 20 years or something, before people consider replacing what they have when they buy a new house. So I wonder if you thought of that, or if that's something we could look at, or things
Sure.
like that.
I mean, we're challenged and we can't mandate or require
Can't
things.
require,
And
but
so,
try to,
some of the ideas we've kicked around a little bit is like, how do we leverage the process, right? So do we look at what fees we charge for permits for, certain types of homes? Do we look at how some things move through the process differently than others to encourage, the builders and other folks to make some of these decisions? I think, we'd like to explore some of those ideas a little bit more. I think because by the time somebody comes in and has already filed their permit for what they're going to build, they've already kind of made their decisions. So somehow you got to get further ahead of it. So something that kind of signals before they kind of put all of that work into that plan, hey, how do you come in with a plan that looks a little different before we see it?
You're right, but I think there's still an opportunity to make the suggestion about, because sometimes it's really not that difficult to switch out,
Sure.
gas for electric. Sometimes something like an oven that's actually a dual fuel, and people it's already, so they're already running like electric. So I guess the point is that, when they're reviewing plans, if there's an opportunity in the office even to have that material, if there's any like state incentives or other or federal rebates and programs to kind of help market that, so that it occurs to people that that might be something. And some developers get it. Some developers know that the market around here, people are conscious, and selling it as a greener home is appealing. But I don't know, I just feel like that's like a missed opportunity. So much of what happens here in town is by right, and and I know that's, and from an energy perspective, those single family homes are particularly energy intensive. For their size, because they're large. You see, look at all the large homes that are built, and how many. The multi-zone, heating and cooling they're putting in there, and it's just such an opportunity, I think. But anyhow, I know it's difficult because you can't require it, but to the extent we can look at that, I know some states are starting to, require it. They got some flack up in New York City about talking about getting rid of gas stoves, and I think California maybe was looking at that. And I'm not sure we're ready to go there yet, but we might get tarred and feathered. But whatever opportunity we can, I would say we should try to take advantage of that at that point, because so much of what happens in town is the by right development that we don't get to see.
Can I just jump in on that idea real quick? Is that what I was thinking is there's a price point where a home is likely going to be flipped. And so before they come in with the permits and, have the whole thing designed out, it's like when we know a lot goes for 600 or 700, even 800, that's likely going to be somebody that's going to do a gut out and put all new infrastructure in. So that's like when we know the point of sale and we know it's at that price point, how do we then intervene? But if it's at a certain price point, it's a brand new construction or a house that's not that old, it's not going to be flipped. It's not going to change over. So maybe that's the way that we filter out the sales and get to people before they come into the city with the plans already baked.
A way to be targeted. Yep.
I would just want to add on that point, there are, I don't know exactly how many developers work in the city. I see a lot of the same signs for the same developers around town. So maybe it's also a matter of just reaching out to those developers to talk to them about, what their needs are. I feel like a lot of this is market driven, or what the developers think is market driven. This is what people want. But what people want might be changing. NPR has been publishing some pretty scary articles about gas stoves. We'd love to get rid of ours. So if I was building a new house, I would not put a gas stove in it. I would put an induction stove in it. They may not know about that. There's an education of the developers that could be helpful.
I got to see an induction stove for the first time this weekend at the event that
At the
Mr.
event.
Stevens was talking about.
It
They're
drew a
really
big crowd.
cool. I was impressed.
Yeah,
So-
exactly, because people are curious about them
Right.
and they're not familiar with them. They got to change all their pots and pans, and it may not work how they expect. But yes, I do feel like it's education, and it may not be, if you can identify those repeat customers who are always coming into the permits project for new projects, reach out to those folks because they're doing a lot of building in the city. So that's one idea. I liked in your slide, the line that says, how do we leverage the unique aspects of the City of Falls Church to our advantage? I think that's a really good way to think about this. I see our unique aspect as the fact that we're a 2 square mile, true or becoming a true city, where you can live, work, play, do everything you need to do here. You can go to the doctor, the library, the post office, everything you can do within 2 square miles. And you don't need to have a car to do that. And so I feel like there's a lot of opportunity for us to really facilitate Falls Church becoming a walk and bike first community. Not that we're going to get rid of cars, but just make it feel safe and inviting and comfortable for people to walk and bike. I think I'd really like you to strengthen the language around bicycling. I think there were 2 recommendations there: expand bike rack capacity at key locations, and then the other one was events and programs to increase confidence and familiarity. I'm sure you have more in the plan, but I don't think that education is going to cut it here. People are not comfortable because it's not safe. And so they're not going to, just if you educate them on this is how you have to ride when you have an SUV bearing down on you on Park Avenue, that's not going to fix it. So we really need facilities, actual protected facilities and more of a bike first mentality. And I'm sure you got that kind of feedback from the CACT. If you haven't spoken to him, I would recommend speaking with member Andrew Olison in particular, has a lot of thoughts about our bicycle infrastructure and our bike plan. Other things, the shuttle. I'm just dubious about the idea of reintroducing the shuttle. I do remember the George. I've lived here most of my life, and I just remember it as this very sad, lumbering bus that nobody ever rode. And I agree completely that we're at a different time, and there are a lot more people living here, and maybe, by 2035 or when we get to 20,000 residents, maybe it could make sense. But I just want to point out that we have the 28A, and it runs every 12 minutes all down 7 and all down 29. And I totally get that not everybody's going to the metro. But those are our 2 main arteries. And I just wonder if there's more that we can do to promote that dang bus. I ride it sometimes. I mostly ride my bike to the metro, but I do ride it sometimes. And it's not I don't know how good the ridership is. I might be riding at weird times. But I don't know how many people even know about it. So, and I don't, I know that they're running that route now, may not be for forever, so may not be appropriate to put such a small thing in a plan. But I would just, promote what we have available to us now. I love the idea of golf carts, scooters, zipping around the city would be great. My husband and I have e-bikes now. We ride them everywhere. They're terrific. I have rode it here tonight. Let's see. I would also support definitely looking at our special exception criteria. I mean, these big buildings that we're building are going to be here for 50 years. So whatever we can do, it's like when my husband buys a new iPhone, he always buys the newest one with the most storage. Like, you just want to build with whatever the best thing is that you have at that time. And so I think if that's what we want, and that really is what makes these projects exceptional, is that they meet those high criteria, like that it's appropriate to include that in our special exceptions. So I would support that recommendation. And I also would very strongly support revising our parking requirements. I think you get what you zone for, right? So if you're asking for parking, you're going to get a lot of cars. And so if we're saying we don't want so many cars, we really have to reflect that in the rules that we're writing for our zoning and planning. I think that's it from me.
Okay, thank you. Speaking of transportation, Mr. Puentes, did you?
I shouldn't go after Commissioner Comot. All the great ideas. Parking, yes, we've heard all this stuff before, but transportation is the largest contributor to greenhouse gases, as we saw, and growing. It's declining in every other sector, but it's increasing in transportation. So I know COG always predicts increases in VMT. Part of that is because we're a growing region, if there's more people, but we've seen here in this region, Mr. Stoddard knows that, at least in Falls Church, since we've been redeveloping, vehicle miles traveled has gone down by 9% in the city. So we've had a lot more people, a lot more density, a lot more development, and driving has gone down. I just sent you an article about that. So, because when you talk about VMT strategies, it's not just about transportation, it is all about density, land use, all the things we talked about. So I would encourage you to include that in there, also as a way to talk to neighbors and people about why these things matter, right? The density has these other benefits as well. The mode shift, I completely agree with Ms. Cohen again. The 28A is fantastic. It's one of WMATA's high priority routes. Every 12 minutes it really is fantastic, and it is growing. We're also going to have the bus rapid transit line should be coming in a few years. So Route 7 as a bus corridor is a lot of opportunity there. And it doesn't just connect to the metro, as we know, it goes to the growing regions in Tysons and elsewhere too. So mode shift, not just bus shuttles, but taking advantage of the bus infrastructure that's here now is a great opportunity. But it's great stuff. Thank you.
Great. Okay.
I have one more comment.
You go first, and then we'll.
Go ahead. Sorry, I just forgot. One thing that I just really would love from you, because there's so many great ideas in this plan, and I just don't know, like, where do we get the most bang for our buck? Like, if we have to choose, like, the top 3 things, or if, like, you could make that look grid where it's like, level of effort versus like payoff, like result, like how does that line up? Like doing that kind of analysis and making those recommendations for as our staff on this would be super helpful to me, because like the decline, you can broken out by those different groups you can kind of see, we don't really have to do anything, but we get a lot from that VCEA. It's just, Virginia is making those changes and we're benefiting from them, right? But there's a lot of different pieces that make up the other elements. And so I guess I want like more lines in that big gray block there. That may not be possible to do, but just, how much does rooftop solar contribute? How much do electrification of buildings contribute? How much, does just like having denser buildings? I don't know if that analysis is possible or not, but that would just be helpful to know, because that just helps us prioritize those different strategies.
I think, that's where we're headed. And the gray block up there will get broken up into some more, into some subcategories. I think the trick is, okay, there are 10 things we could do to, promote electrification in buildings. Trying to kind of, which one of those will make the most impact, and modeling that out is really, we're just kind of guessing, right? And so I think I understand where you want to go. I think we've heard the same thing from city council on the government plan. And it's where I think with each of these topics, trying to kind of have a broader conversation about what some of the other benefits are. Can you do me a favor and skip all the way to the end of the appendix? So, is there any more after that? Oh, I may have cut it out. Yeah, go ahead, all the way down to the bottom if you wouldn't mind. Or one more up, I'm sorry. So as I've gone around to talking to the other boards and commissions, I've tried to kind of frame things up in a way that says, what are some other benefits to some of the things that, that are on the idea list, right? Because what I showed you tonight is not the plan. Like, we're trying to kind of collect input and ideas on what needs to go into the plan, right?
Understood, yeah.
Appreciate everybody's kind of comments on that. I think trying to get broader awareness and support for what we're trying to do. I'm trying to kind of also talk about what are some of the other benefits for transitioning to electric vehicles, for having a more walkable and bikeable city. Some of this, like I think on the cost-benefit analysis, is also the practicality and our ability to get it done, right? I mean, you know this more than anything, I think, with all the bike lane conversations over the last couple of years. It's a challenge here in the city to get some of those kinds of things done. And so not only like how much do things cost and what level of effort from a staff standpoint does it take, but can we actually build enough momentum to get them done? And I think part of that is being able to talk to the community about some of the benefits of the energy plan beyond just the emissions part of it, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think education is a big part of this. I guess I'm imagining, I feel like it's good to have a whole menu of different things that we can do, but I really would love to have a focused, like, these are like the top 3 things that we think we can do that would really move the needle and that we think we can get done. And I just don't really know what those are or what they should be. So,
I understand. We'll keep working at it.
thank you. It looks great though. It's so many great ideas.
All right, I have an idea that we're going to make an impact on homes and transportation. If you put in solar roof, the city gives you a golf cart.
I think Jim Snyder would probably go
The
for that.
solar roof is so expensive, and the golf cart is not. But that would be, I wonder how many people would be tricked into thinking about the
Are we allowed
solar
to
roof
drive
if they
golf
got a
carts on
free
city
golf
streets?
cart.
Are we even allowed to, can you drive an electric golf cart on city streets or no?
So Virginia's got a series of regulations for low-speed vehicles, like
You have, like,
electric
turn
vehicles.
signals and stuff
So
you
you got to
can do?
have, it can't be just the golf cart from,
Right.
Westfields or whatever. It's got to, it has to have a few,
All right.
things beyond a basic golf cart. But yes, the Virginia law allows it, particularly with our speed limits coming down in the city and all of that. I think,
Yeah,
I
there you
think there's
go.
what is it, a 30-mile-an-hour limit?
I'm not sure.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think they can go faster. Yeah.
They're really slow.
Okay, Ms. Friedlander, did you have any
I
suggestions or
don't have a
comments?
whole lot of comments because I love going last. I also hate going last because I literally strike off everything on my list. But I did want to say, I think the outreach is a great idea to the developers, but I would also bring a real estate community in on those. However you're doing that outreach, just because sometimes that's the point of contact for a homeowner, more so than an actual developer or builder, because somebody will then make the decisions and then just go find somebody to do it for them. So I think if you fold realtors and real estate brokers and all of those, that whole community into that outreach, I think it'll be a bigger bandwidth that you're reaching.
That's a good point, because there's very few real estate agents when you're going around looking for a house that will tell you about the energy use in the home that you're looking at. They're just not sensitized to that issue.
Right, and when they're giving people ideas of how to envision what they can do to the house, rather than a full tear down, maybe you could do this, and maybe you could do this. There's a great incentive about this that the city's going to do. So I think those are good selling points. Aside of that, I think it's a great start, and I'm looking forward to all the greatness that you're going to develop with it. A lot of good ideas.
Okay, well, Mr. Young, thank you again very much for giving us a chance to provide some early input as you work on the plan, and wish you luck as you go around to the other boards and commissions.
Thank you for your time this evening. See you all back in September.
Very good. All right, I think we are on to information items. First one being Planning Commissioners' reports. Do any of the planning commissioners have a report they would like to make? Seeing no's, I will make a quick one. I went to the Economic Development Council, I think, EDC. They had a senior VP from Federal Realty. They're the ones that do the Birch and Broad. They indicated a very high level of desirability of the city on commercial leasing. And they also, actually, this person didn't indicate it, but there were other comments in the meeting that something regarding the Stratford may be coming back to us in September. I have no idea what it is, but I just thought I would tweak your interest with that, and that's all I had. So I think we're now into Mr. Stoddard, the director's report. If you can possibly accomplish that before we reach the pumpkin hour of 10:30, that would be wonderful.
I am happy to try. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. So there are 4 items, and these are in here as updates. I don't intend to walk through the actual attachments in detail, but I did want to provide them to you. First up, I want to announce and celebrate the publication of our 2023 annual profile. I'm very happy. This is something we started following the adoption of the 2017 Vision chapter. And the idea was to keep reminding people of what is that community desire for a 2040 future of the city. What are the core values that make that happen, and where are we making progress in support of that vision and those principles. So 2023 profile is out. This year, Zoe LaRive was our lead author, but obviously she doesn't do it alone. She had a lot of support from folks across the organization. And actually, one thing, I said I wouldn't bring them up, but I do want to bring up this really slick map. Cameron Garris produced it for us. A lot of people are talking about the 15-minute city. We thought we'd sort of one-up them and talk about the 10-minute city. So, Jack, if you're able to go to the attachments and just jump to the back of the profile, we always put the map on the back, so it's easy to find. But we took thinking about what makes a 10-minute city, we thought about, do you have access to your everyday needs? So we used a 3-day trial of a network analysis tool to think about how far can you get from a grocery store in 10 minutes. So we used the 4 larger grocery stores in the city, the Good Fortune, the Aldi, the Harris Teeter, and the Giant. From there, we used the sidewalk network to map out where can you get in 10 minutes. Then we blurred the edges because GIS always looks a little rigid, and I don't like rigid. And then you ended up with those sort of globs on the map. So there it is. And I think actually if we can zoom in, there's sort of a startlingly good statistic. It's the little house-shaped one in yellow. There we go. So it looks like it's relatively small geography of the city, but it's actually 70% of the city's homes are within that 10-minute walk of those grocery stores. And a lot of that is
The multifamily.
in no small part due to redevelopment. We talked about it with the emissions plan. That's now 70% of the city's homes are within a comfortable walking distance, not to buy, a month or 2 weeks or maybe not even a week's worth of groceries, but it is something that you can comfortably stop by as part of your daily routine if you do need something from the grocery store. So it's just one of those things, sort of getting people in the habit of thinking, I need to go to the grocery store. Can I just put on my sneakers and go? I don't need to find my car keys first. Going back to the director's report, second item on there is the city manager's quarterly update to the council on progress achieved for the council's 2-year work plan. Of course, there are several items that run through the Planning Commission on that, so that's available for your review. And of course, you see them as they come to you, so those shouldn't be a surprise. Report on the community satisfaction survey. So this had been running in the city. It's a statistically valid survey of city residents, asking them about a range of things in terms of their satisfaction with city services. The full report is available, and each of the slides, it's a daunting slide deck in terms of number of slides because each one includes a demographic breakdown on each question, so that the number of questions is not in the thousands. It's just that the slides are because of the demographic breakout. Overall, people were happy with the level of services, especially when you benchmark it against nearby and comparable jurisdictions. I did flag a couple things that I thought were interesting for the planning shop in particular, and I wanted to share that with you as well as the Planning Commission. A lot of questions around pace of development, population growth, the lack of availability to affordable housing, and I thought the presenters did a nice job of pointing out that if those two things are obviously linked. That if you try to sort of tamp down population growth, then you're necessarily going to sort of make the housing affordability problem worse. One doesn't necessarily solve the other, but if you halt one, then you make the other worse. And then also a continuing interest in the community for a more walkable, bikeable environment. And so, it's the things that come up to you sort of regularly. I do want to say that as the planning shop, we are trying to take a more forward approach on communicating out, getting the annual community profile out every year to tell everyone what progress is being made in the city, reminding people that there is a shared community vision, and also working into our annual cycle what we're calling a 5-year look ahead. There are a lot of documents on the city website, and so we want to have a short deck where we can tell people what are the development projects that are coming online, what are the big things in the CIP that you're going to see coming out. We made that presentation to the League of Women Voters last year and also to the Chamber of Commerce, and it was well received. So I think we want to try making those a regular part of our work. And then lastly, I didn't expect this to generate a conversation, but I did want to keep you all obviously involved of what's happening with T-zones. Jack and I were in front of council on June 5th for a work session. We were on a walking tour just 2 days ago on July 17th. I don't think June 5th is right. I think that's not right. Is that the right date? Was it June 5th? No, it wasn't June 5th. It was June, but maybe it was June 5th. Oh, all right. Well, there you go. The proposal is continuing to update, but the upcoming dates are in August 7th for council to consider a first reading, and then the tentative schedule is to move through the Planning Commission at a fair clip so that it could come back to council for their final consideration on September 11th.
And does that conclude your report?
That wraps up my report. Thank you.
All right.
Can I make 2 quick comments?
Please.
Just first, compliments to you all on the community profile. It's so great. I really love reading that every year. And there's also a really great table in there, the AARP Livability Index. I love that. It made me laugh. It compares our neighborhood metrics to the U.S. median neighborhood. So on access to grocery stores, we have 5.4 stores and markets within a half mile at a neighborhood scale, and the median neighborhood has 0. We have 5.4 parks, median is 1, 0.4 libraries, median is 0. Anyway, and then we have, of course, like 300,000 jobs, and the median is 0 jobs. So it just says a lot about how unique we are as a small community and where we're located in the DC area and the opportunity I think that we have. So I'm glad you included that. Thank you. I also just wanted to note on the concerns about development, if you look at the presentation, there are some interesting age breaks on that question. The question was, are you satisfied or unsatisfied with how the city manages growth and development? Among those who are ages 18 to 50 or so, 50 and under, it's about 2 to 1 satisfied. Among those who are older than 50, it's either divided or largely majority dissatisfied. So there is a pretty significant, which I think we might not be surprising to us to hear that, but I think it's just something to keep in mind.
Okay. Any other comments, reactions for Mr. Stoddard? Seeing none, I'll ditto the comment that the community profile I thought was very well done. It's the best one of all the ones that I've seen. So keep at it, and look forward to future reports as well. Okay, unless there's any other comments, I think we can go ahead and close this meeting out. I'll just say a quick note of thanks to all of you for all the effort you put in on the items that we undertook this evening. So there's a lot of sweat that's put into it, and I personally want to express my thanks. And so unless there's any other comments, I think we can go ahead and close this out, and we'll see you at our next meeting.
Which is end of August, right? August 16th or something?
Yeah, well, it will be for me, because I won't be here for the first meeting.
Do we have a first meeting in August?
Oh my gosh, I didn't do the look ahead.
We don't, right?
Uh,